Welcome to the stream. We're about to get started here. I want to welcome everyone to the stream. Thanks for tuning in. We're live now. Let me know if you can hear me, if everything's okay. We're going to get started today. Hey guys, how's it going? Yesterday was a little bit crazy, wasn't it? Lots of new stuff inside of that budget, and I've been trying to work my way through it, create videos for everyone to break down the important things that are there for you. But hope you guys have had a good Tuesday so far. I've been having a good one myself. Got my coffee here again. I've seen lots of people waiting in the chat. I love to see it. Thanks for tuning in again, guys. I'm seeing John and Ruby and Ninja. If you're watching this video and you haven't said hey in the chat yet, say hey right now. I'm looking at it and saying hi. Ninja, oh good, the audio is good today. That's awesome. Yeah, Gerald. I can't spill my coffee today. That's what happened yesterday. If you go back to the live stream video yesterday, oh my goodness, people like in the comments afterwards like just timestamped that point in the video over and over and over again, saying that's me, Wreck-It Russell. And Gerald, much like many people should. Or what am I saying? Much like I think many people think I should, I've downgraded myself. What I actually spilled yesterday was my big glass of water. I'm going back to the sippy cup version. I can't trust myself with a glass of water anymore, you guys. It's just like I'll spill it everywhere, clearly. But so today, here's what we're going to do today. The budget obviously came out yesterday, important stuff in there, and just as important is the reactions from the other parties and what's been going on in the past 24 hours since this was released. And right now, currently in the House of Commons, well, there's some heated discussion going on, to say the least, about things that were in the budget, things that weren't in the budget, about some of the cutbacks to certain benefits and supports. This is all being discussed in the House of Commons right now, but I want to take you back about 15 minutes from where we are currently, and that's question period in the House of Commons. I don't know if you guys know about question period, but every single day that the House of Commons sits, they give politicians the opportunity to ask the government questions, basically roast them on what they think they're doing wrong. And they do this every day. Now, every day it's not always Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau there for question period. They have people who come in and their secretaries answer the questions for them. But every single Wednesday, the Prime Minister comes in and they can ask questions directly to the Prime Minister. Now, today's Tuesday, but I just realized after watching a little bit of question period, hey, Trudeau's in on this one too. So I'm wondering what kind of questions are going to be asked of him about this budget, about the things that they left out, all of the things that are currently going on. So this is what we're going to take a look at today. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you haven't already, hit the like button. Helps get this video out to more people. But without further ado, let's hop right into what's been going on here. Again, this is about 15 minutes, as of 15 minutes ago, so we might skim a little bit here at the beginning, but I'll show you what's going on right now. Yeah, there he is. Let's listen in on what's going on.
We will continue to be there to help the provinces and healthcare systems, and in the long term, yes.
Let me set the stage a little bit. Let me set the stage. The NDP say, hey, there's good things in the budget, but they're not saying who's going to pay for it. The NDP want the ultra wealthy to pay for all this spending. They're also frustrated there wasn't more support for students. The Bloc Québécois are really pushing for the old age security that was only for people 75 plus in this budget. They're saying, hey, what the heck? Aren't people 65 plus? Shouldn't they be included too? They're really pushing, and they actually proposed an amendment to the budget that would make this change. We're in this debate today. We're going to see what comes of that, as well as the Conservatives saying, hey, there's no real fiscal anchor for all of this. Where is this money going to come from? How's this going to work in the future? And also both the Liberals or the Conservatives and the NDP actually agreed on something for once. They came together and said, hey, there are good things in the budget, but we don't trust the Liberals to actually implement it. We don't trust that they're going to do the things they say they are. They've been promising national child care for 50 plus years, 70 years. They talked about in their throne speech national pharmacare, right? But they've abandoned that in this budget. It's not nowhere to be seen. So while some parties are saying, hey, not a bad idea on the national child care, lots of people aren't comfortable in saying that they believe the Liberal government is actually going to do anything about it. So with that said, now let's listen into what questions they have to say.
We will be increasing health transfers. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, that's not an answer in both official languages from the Prime Minister. This budget is a disappointment to many Canadians. the idea of increasing health transfers to the provinces was completely forgotten in this budget. There's no real action around vaccines.
Provinces
Does
want
the
more
Prime
money
Minister
to
think
get
he
through the rest
knows
of
what the
the
provinces
COVID
need
situation.
better than they
want more money.
themselves? The
The government didn't give them any in this budget.
Mr. Speaker, when the leader of the Conservative Party talks about little programs to help lots of people, it's shameful, Mr. Speaker. For 1 year now, Mr. Speaker, we've been listening to Canadians and working with them on this pandemic. We've been helping small business, workers, families, seniors, young people. We've been there. We've had their backs. That's precisely what we're doing with this budget. And the Conservative Party says, oh, no, no, no. You shouldn't help people that much. You need to reduce the deficit. Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians will have a clear choice to make at some point. They can either adopt the Conservative vision or go along with our Liberal plan. But for now, we're going to get through this pandemic. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me know if I'm bothering them.
Yeah, people in chat, there's lots of different discussions going on around what's happened with some of the benefits of the lowering of this as we get into the extension time of it. Ideas Pixel saying, hey, why don't we instead of doing these supports, do like an income tax break for low-income Canadians. This is one of the things that people have said in comparison to UBI. Instead of UBI potentially doing a negative income tax for people at low income, you actually get a larger return. That's definitely an idea. Lots of ideas here.
In the budget, will the government accept our outreached hand and amend the budget for the benefit of seniors? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. In election 2019, we recognized and we understood how much support seniors needed. And we knew that those over 75 had higher costs, higher expenses, because as Canadians get older and older, they're concerned about their pensions and their retirement savings. So we made a promise to increase OAS by 10% for those 75 and older. That's precisely what we're delivering with this budget. It's good news for seniors.
Yeah, they're increasing it for seniors over 75 plus, but the Bloc Québécois are saying, hey, that's not good enough. You're creating multiple classes of citizens in the seniors bracket.
Perhaps
so many people between 65 and 70, 60
65
even.
And over.
Yeah, here. Listen.
Or 75 and over, they'll get a little bit more. But those between 65 and 75 are clearly being discriminated against in an unjustifiable manner. The idea that life is less expensive when you're under 75, where does that come from? Who made that up? Does the Prime Minister realize? Will the government accept our amendment to help seniors aged 65 to 75? The Right Honourable Prime
The Bloc Québécois actually put this into an amendment or like a sub-amendment. The Conservatives came back and said, here's what we want to change. Bloc Québécois came back and said, here's what we want to change. They want to just make it the same OAS support of 10% bump up for most seniors, but lower the age by 10 years to 65 instead of 75.
Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, as a government, we have always been there for seniors. We always will be. One of the first things we did was increase the GIS after 2015 by 10%, and we will continue to be there for seniors, be it by investing in New Horizons and giving them more help during the pandemic, or now by increasing OAS by 10% for all seniors 75 and over. We will continue to be there with $3 billion to work with the provinces to protect seniors in long-term care as well. We will always be there for our seniors.
Seems like this discussion is like you didn't provide support for seniors, and then the Liberal government says, yes, we did. Look at what we did. They say, you didn't do enough. We did do enough. You didn't do enough. We did do enough.
A budget is a matter of making choices. The Prime Minister has chosen not to tax the ultra-rich and make them pay their fair share, and he has chosen to cut assistance to people during the third wave. Why has the government chosen to side with the ultra-rich instead of helping young people?
Trudeau wanted a wealth
Prime
tax.
Minister. Mr.
Or not Trudeau,
quite simply
Jagmeet
false. One of the first things we did as a government in 2015 was to increase taxes on the wealthiest and lower taxes on the middle class. Unfortunately, the NDP voted against that. We will always keep looking for ways to help those in need. In this budget, we're ensuring that digital service providers pay their fair share of taxes. We have imposed a tax on luxury vehicles. We have aggressive tax avoidance. We're cracking down on that. We will always be there to support those in need in this country.
So the NDP are saying, hey, we wanted them to include a wealth tax in this budget. We wanted them to answer the question, who's going to pay for the pandemic? Jagmeet Singh is saying, well, they clearly have sided with the ultra wealthy here because there's not much in terms of taxes for the ultra wealthy apart from taxing the toys, right? Like luxury cars, luxury boats, luxury planes for the rich. That's how they're planning on taxing the rich, as well as implementing some extra taxes for online platforms and like offshore accounts. That's what they're hoping to target here. But Jagmeet Singh says this isn't quite enough.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
The wave of COVID-19 is hitting Ontario hard. It is a disaster. ICU units are overrun. We're seeing healthcare workers on the brink, and the people who need the vaccine the most are the least likely to get vaccinated. And we've got a prime minister that continues to refuse to improve access to paid sick leave. So will the prime minister declare a public welfare emergency and use the Emergency Act to make sure people who need the vaccine actually get it, and make sure we've got a paid sick leave that actually works?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, we've continually been there to support provinces and territories, to support Canadians right across the country. We made a straightforward province that we would have people's backs, and that's exactly what we have done, what we will continue to do, working with partners right across the country, responding to that difficult situation that so many Canadians are facing with this third wave, particularly in the GTA. On the sickness benefit, we brought it in so no worker, regardless of where they live or who they work for, has to choose between going to work sick or putting food on the table, and we made 2 additional weeks available through this benefit as well. We will continue to support Canadians. We have your backs.
That's an interesting little exchange there between Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau, because Jagmeet Singh of the NDP has taken credit for the fact that the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit was even included when the CRB came into effect. He's saying, hey, why are the Liberals getting credit for that? But at the same time, he's also saying, hey, this program isn't good enough, this one that we fought to be included. Now the Liberals say, hey, we have this Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit for paid sick leave to help people stay home when they're sick, but largely people haven't been applying for that program even. And that's largely due to the fact that you have to not work 50% of your work week in order to apply for it. So many people who would need to take time off to go get tested to see if they need to stay home or not. Many people just aren't doing that because they'd have to take a day off work because they don't have sick leave because they haven't yet shown that they're going to be off work for over half the week, right? So this is why it's a little bit interesting. Trudeau's kind of like saying, hey, we have this awesome program, but people really aren't applying for it based on the numbers that I've seen.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's budget was truly an open bar. It would have been nice to see the same liberal enthusiasm for camping reflected in other widespread. I have to interrupt the member. There was a lag. We didn't hear everything. I would ask the member to start his question over so we can all hear what he had to say. I'm sorry for interrupting. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's budget was truly an open bar. It would have been nice to see the same liberal enthusiasm for camping reflected in other widespread problems like health. The provinces are calling for stable, predictable, and unconditional increases in healthcare transfers. We Conservatives support that. In the middle of a pandemic, it's just common sense. Why didn't the Prime Minister accept Quebec's main ask?
Okay, so we're going to skip
right
over this
honourable
answer because we already saw it. Basically, people are saying, why didn't you send more money to provinces to get through the rest of the pandemic? Trudeau said, hey, we are going to increase this over time, but we're not going to do any direct, no strings attached increases. The provinces have to show certain things in order to get the money. We can go into some of those details later, but I want to get into the debate about the budget, which is scheduled to be going on right now. So we're just going to scroll through this a little bit.
Support our amendment.
Okay, here's an amendment from the bloc.
Thank the member. I would say
Our own
vaccine, Mr. Speaker.
To dig a $354 billion deficit without making a sustained increase to health transfers. For Quebecers, health is the priority. It's also the government of Quebec's priority. Their only ask was for an increase in health transfers to cover 35% of health care costs.
Bloc Québécois is upset they didn't get their health transfers. Here's Krista Freeland. Let's see what she's talking about. Oh, it's about the health transfers.
Is fighting COVID-19, and the federal government is there to support the provinces and territories in that.
What is going on with this stream? Okay.
Last month, we added $5 billion to our support to the vaccine campaign and the healthcare system. The honourable member for Joliette. Well, that's far from the 35%.
Okay,
what
I want to get into the budget specific stuff. Okay, here we go. This is Ed Fasky, the finance critic for the Conservatives. He's probably going to have some intense words here to say to Christopher.
Biomanufacturing capacity in Canada. We've invested $5 billion in March. Last summer, we gave the provinces and territories $19 billion to support their fight against COVID-19. And as my colleague just said, in the budget, we've announced $2.2 billion for our capacity to manufacture vaccines domestically.
Well, 3 months ago, the Prime Minister gave the Finance Minister a mandate letter instructing her to do 3 things. First, avoid creating new permanent spending. Second, review Canada's debt management strategy. And third, present a new fiscal anchor. That is the standard the Prime Minister set himself. And yet this minister followed none of them. Her budget contains massive permanent spending, the debt is out of control, and her only fiscal anchor is a floating one. Why did the minister ignore these directives, and is she going to ignore future ones as well?
Okay, so a little bit of context. They had a mandate letter. Christopher Freeland got this mandate letter from Justin Trudeau at the beginning of January. Had a whole bunch of things. Justin Trudeau sent this out to every single different minister who's underneath him in his government. So he sent this one to Christopher Freeland as Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, and one of the things inside of it was, hey, you're not supposed to create any new long-term spending. Now, in this budget, she clearly did. Justin Trudeau probably knew about it, but the finance critic for the Conservatives is saying, hey, what the heck? Are you just like not going to do what you're told to by the Prime Minister? How are we going to know what to expect from you going forward if you don't follow your mandate letter?
Mr. Speaker, our budget sets out a prudent and sustainable fiscal path, and we set out a clear fiscal anchor. We commit to a declining debt to GDP ratio and to unwinding the COVID deficits. And by 25-26, the debt to GDP ratio will be 49.2%, and the deficit will be 1.1%. Canada's debt to GDP ratio continues to be the lowest in the G7.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Okay. Well, Canadians expect their government to help them in their time of need, and we support those efforts. But the budget is also by far the biggest, most expensive in Canadian history. Our deficit has ballooned to a staggering $354 billion, and our national debt will soon reach an unimaginable $1.4 trillion. Yet the budget fails to present the debt management plan that the Prime Minister had told his Finance Minister to deliver. So why did the Minister disregard the Prime Minister's directive? And when will she deliver his debt management plan?
Jay, the answer to your question, this is live. It's just 10 minutes back. I wanted to sort of skim through the question period because they're actually going to get into a specific debate about the budget, but I realized that Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland were giving some answers here. So we're just like recapping on what was just said in the House of Commons leading into this debate that's specifically on the budget. That is live. This is only just like 10 minutes behind, maybe a little bit. Yeah, around like 10 minutes behind. So we're going to be caught up really, really quickly here. He's asking about fiscal anchors and debt to GDP.
Mr. Speaker, in Annex 2 of the budget, we present a very clear debt management strategy, and we point out that we have been carefully and thoughtfully pushing out the maturities of Canada's debt. They were 15% of our bonds were long bonds before the pandemic. Last year, we pushed that out to 29%, and in the budget, we commit to moving that to 42%. This is a prudent fiscal.
Okay, I kind of want to break down why I think that's significant, because like sometimes when we get into these like economic policies, it gets a little bit abstract and a little bit too numbery, but let me explain exactly what she's saying here. The question is, how are we going to pay for all of this spending? There's no real fiscal anchor inside of this budget, meaning like there's no real plan to manage Canada's debt going forward. This is what a lot of the Conservatives are upset about, right? And what Chrystia Freeland's saying is that, hey, this is our management strategy. Our plan is we recognize right now, because of what's been going on in the economy and the Bank of Canada is essentially money printing, we have super low interest rates right now, like historically low interest rates. That means that any debt that people have with those interest rates, well, the payment on that debt is far lower. Chrystia Freeland's saying, hey, we need to take advantage of this opportunity, having these extremely low interest rates, and borrow, and lock in this debt at a long-term rate, right? Like they want to expand it out to, instead of like 5-year debt, like a loan for 5 years, they want to extend it out to 10, 15, 20, 30, and they're even considering a 50-year loan that they can take where they don't have to pay it back until 50 years from now. So she's saying, hey, this is fiscally prudent because we're locking in these low interest rates for the long term, and we'll deal with that debt in 50 years when we get to it, in 30 years when we get to it. But we need to lock in this low interest before interest rates go up, and we can't do the structural spending to boost the economy that we need to. This is what she's saying. Now, there are questions about whether or not that's a good idea. I mean, like largely the government, if they're taking on huge amounts of debt, right, if they're taking on all of this money and they're pushing it out in the long term, well, maybe they think that there's going to be some sort of inflation in our future, because you might already know that if we have inflation, everyone's debt essentially goes down, right? If I take out a loan 10 years ago for $100,000 house and it just stays at $100,000, but we have inflation and asset prices inflate and our money is less valuable, well, then that $100,000 is less valuable proportionate to what the money's value is today, right? So if a government has a huge amount of debt like Canada does, why not push their interest rates all the way down the road? Because maybe $1.4 trillion of debt isn't going to be a lot in the future. Maybe it's not going to be that significant because of the inflation over the years. I just find this stuff so interesting. People don't put it in the right context for it to be a story and for it to make sense, right? But this is why I think it's interesting. It's like, what are we going to do with all of this? But let's get back to what she's saying, though.
Approach, and we'll lock in today's low interest rates.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago, the Prime Minister sent new mandate letters to his ministers, and
this is the same topic we just talked about. I want to see if we can. Okay.
A digital services tax.
Yeah, so they're saying we didn't tax the wealthy, but we put this digital service tax and the luxury tax. I want to get up to
this
live.
budget will invest almost $30 billion working with provincial and territorial and Indigenous partners to support quality, not-for-profit childcare and ensuring the needs of early childhood educators are at the heart of the system. Mr. Speaker, we told Canadians we would do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And that is what...
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Oh, Gustavo, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. You really don't have to, but I appreciate that, Gustavo. That's so nice of you. You say, hi, Russell, what is the final amount for CRB? Well, CRB for the next while is still going to be $500 per week, but with taxes withheld. I actually made a video about it today. You can check my channel. We go into every single detail, but it's actually going to be lowered down to $300 per week, probably. We get into some of the questions. It may not happen. They may not have the ability to if it doesn't pass through the House of Commons. So there's some details details to go over still there, but if you're interested in that, check out the video I just posted this morning on the channel. We get into every single fine detail of that to answer your question there, Gustavo. Okay, we're still scrubbing here to get up to the live debate.
Shepherd. Mr. Speaker,
she's going to be upset about
seniors
OAS.
see through the government's budget game. They're asking for a sustainable increase in their old age pensions starting at age 65. But what Ottawa is offering them is a one-time electioneering payment of $500 and only for those aged 75 and over. Seniors can see that the federal government is dividing them into two classes according to age and postponing pension increases indefinitely. That is why the Bloc is amending the budget to include an immediate increase in pensions starting at age 65. Will the government support our amendment out of respect for all seniors?
She's really been pushing for more support for
The Honourable
seniors. She's
Deputy
like
Minister.
the MP who's been pushing for this in the Bloc Québécois.
Mr. Speaker, with the members on the other side, we share their respect for seniors. We are aware of the reality that many seniors live in poverty, and that was the case when we came to power. We chose to target seniors 75 and up because their needs are the greatest. The honourable member for
people are not
Shefford.
going to like that. Anytime you say something like this person's needs are greater than yours, like people who are 65 to 75, not 75 yet, I think they're going to be upset hearing that, saying, hey, their needs are greater than your needs. Like, who is prioritized here? Some of these people have struggled the most between 65 and 75. So people hearing that probably aren't going to be too enthused.
Mr. Speaker, seniors are not fooled. They can see that sending a one-time check this summer for $500 means the government is trying to buy votes instead of increasing pensions for all seniors.
People are saying this is
After
an
all
election
they went through
budget.
during the
People
pandemic,
are
they
saying the
thought
Liberals
that the
want to
federal
buy
government
votes.
understood.
That's been one perception of the budget.
They expected Ottawa to finally act on the loss of their purchasing power. They expected Ottawa to understand that they were the ones most affected by the pandemic. What they didn't expect was to be instrumentalized for the election. Why does the government insist on refusing to increase the pensions of those 65 and up? The Honourable Deputy Minister. Mr. Speaker, we understand very, very well seniors' needs, and we understand the tragedy that was COVID, and that is why the Canadian Armed Forces went to long-term care facilities. They went there to save seniors' lives. When it comes to old age security, this is a permanent increase for all seniors in Canada who are 75 and up.
She just says that at the end. It's not really an answer on the 65 plus thing. This is like, people don't say, like, in the government, the people, if they don't want to ever say no to something, right? Because it sounds bad, but it seems like they're just saying no, that they don't want to do it.
At the costs incurred by the temporary closure of certain slaughterhouses.
Okay.
And coordination by this Liberal government. As the pandemic began and worsened, contracts were signed worth millions of dollars outside Canada while turning a blind eye to our local vaccine manufacturer. Mr. Speaker, will the government admit that they had ignored our local vaccine manufacturers? We have a shortage of vaccine supply, and as a result, we are now in this third wave. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. It's a member for whom I have enormous respect, Mr. Speaker. But what he said could not be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. We indeed have invested more than $1 billion. And what we should celebrate today, Mr.
Ninja
Speaker,
Slaughterhouse.
is
you mean
in the
the
budget
Canada
that was
housing
presented
market?
yesterday by the Minister of Finance. As
We can
she
get into
just
that
said,
too. There wasn't much in the budget for housing.
We are investing an additional $2.2 billion in biomanufacturing, Mr. Speaker. We know that there's a lot of talent in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We know that there's a lot of expertise in Canada, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to invest in Made in Canada solution to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we enter the second wave of the pandemic,
wow,
tremendous
Candace,
advances
that's
have been made in the
interesting.
past 12
Saying that
months.
your parents were in that group of people who have been largely ignored throughout this pandemic. Used to be Liberal supporters, now going to go NDP. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that could be like what happens here is that whole age range, and there's a lot of people there.
Eligible to book their appointments.
Out. I noticed the video.
Okay, this is just some
No problem. So I'm going to quote, I'm going to
question of privilege. Okay, well, good thing we started go a little bit back, because they're not even at the budget yet. Like, they're not even at the debate for the budget yet. Okay, well, now we're live. We're going to keep this going. This is going to get into a specific debate about the budget. It was supposed to start right at 3, but it seems like they're still sorting things out. We're going to keep this on with a low volume, though. And we can go into some, like, I've got the budget up here as well. So I'm going to chill with you in the chat, and we're going to go into taking a look at the budget and questions that you might have until this pops up with the actual debate about the budget. So I'm going to keep that up there. I'll pull up the budget here. Yeah, you get to see my desktop, and now we go full cam. All right, so let me pull up the budget here. What do you guys think of all this stuff that's being said? Like, this is one of the big things they've talked about, is this support for seniors or lack thereof if you're not 75 plus. But also there have been calls saying that, hey, there wasn't enough support here for students. They got a doubling of the student grant, but this is only for people who are currently in school, right? You can get a little bit extra money that you don't have to pay back from your student loan, but largely for people who have just graduated, it's a little more challenging. They say they want to create more jobs, create more training opportunities, but not too many details on exactly what that's going to look like. Yeah, thanks. I like that wallpaper too, Candace. Saskatchewan has the highest property tax in the country. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. We've also got, they gave disability one time 600, now they want seniors to have one time 500. Yeah, I mean, like, it's interesting, like, which groups of people the government has chosen to support and which ones they really haven't, right? This is like what the issue with when these budgets come out is that there's always going to be groups that fall through the cracks, and then over time, if there's enough advocacy for these things, then maybe opinions can start to change, policies can start to change. But as of right now, there's a lot that's missing in here. Like people were looking for the UBI information if that was going to be in here, but no, it wasn't. That's a little bit to be expected because they just voted on it like a couple weeks ago. It wasn't going to be included in the 700-page document. But yeah, Ninja is great, says it all looks like posturing. The tax on luxury cars, planes, boats is a big tell. Yeah, I mean, like it's the sentiment, I guess, is nice, but is that really going to move the needle when it comes to tax revenue and paying for these programs? Like it's still debated, of course. Like, would a wealth tax work? Would it be good for the country? Would it push businesses and wealthy individuals out of the country? Right, that's certainly a possibility. Is that even the best way to go forward with it? And even if we did put in a wealth tax, it wouldn't pay for all of our programs right now. Like, we don't pay for the programs here in Canada with tax revenue. We pay for it with Government of Canada bonds. Whether you like to hear it or not, the government writes a whole bunch of IOUs, and big banks and other investors buy those IOUs, and then the Bank of Canada buys those IOUs from the big banks and investors who have bought those Bank of Canada or those Government of Canada bonds. I have a video on that. It's a little bit of a complex system, but that's how the Bank of Canada prints money essentially into the system. But that's how they subsidize the government spending. It's not really through taxes anymore. It's largely through those IOUs that the Government of Canada is writing. So if you're just tuning into the stream and you don't know what's going on here, we're waiting for the debate to get started in the House of Commons about this budget. We're going to hear from different politicians from both sides of the party, what they think about the budget, what they want to see included. We know the Bloc Québécois want more support for seniors. We know the NDP are pretty frustrated about these CRB changes, the lowering of that support, given the fact that there wasn't a wealth tax included. The Conservatives say, hey, there's no fiscal anchor for this budget. There's no guarantee that our grandchildren aren't going to be paying this down the road 50 years from now, right? And they're also saying, hey, this, Chrystia Freeland, it was in your mandate letter not to create new spending, but you still did. And also everyone's saying, hey, we like the idea of this childcare plan. We like some of the ideas in the budget, but we don't trust the Liberals to actually implement it and make it a reality. So that's the context of what's happening here. And I have up on my other monitor here the House of Commons. So right now they're just dealing with some technical issues, and then I believe the debate's scheduled to begin. It was supposed to start at 3, but for now we're going to stick with the chat. You can see it up there, and I'm going to be reading chat messages here and answering some questions. I've got the budget up here if I need to flip up, if we want to check out some questions on it. Hey, Alberta Skate Parks, happy 420. Happy 420 to you, my man. Have a good day with that. Oh, man. Yeah, Insignius, unacceptable. Honestly, we need a UBI. It's not rocket scientists. That's the view of a lot of people, Insignius, especially these days. And I think that one of the biggest arguments for UBI is growth of tech, right? Tech, artificial intelligence, they're going to replace human jobs. It's just a matter of time. We need some sort of plan, whether this is UBI or something totally different. Like the devil's in the details. I always say that on the channel. And you're welcome here no matter where you land on these issues. But AI is going to be a problem. They're going to take like humans' jobs, Canadians' jobs. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing as long as we can reallocate resources so that people can actually live healthy and wealthy lives, right? It's such a tumultuous time, and I think unfortunately, based on the policies that have been going on, the wealth gap's just going to grow more and more and more, which is why I'm so focused on investing as much of my money as I possibly can and saving as much as I can now so that I can be sort of ride that wave as it goes. Even though it may not be the best thing for the country, you got to play the game by the rules that are set out for you, and that's what I talk about in the course in the description too. Yeah, those crooks print money out of thin air anyways without gold backup reserve. Yeah, we haven't had gold backing our currency for a long time now. So all money and currency is just a figment of our imaginations, right? It's only valuable because we see value in it. And most of this money isn't in cash anyways anymore, right? It's all zeros on a bank balance sheet. Interesting stuff. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, Nancy. Nancy says, keep up the great work. That's awesome. Thank you, Nancy. What financial stability like? Yeah, bring on the election when it's safe, and I'll be going NDP. Let's give them a chance. Interesting. Yeah, I wonder what the support's going to look like for the NDP going forward in the future. And let me show you what we're waiting on. I've got the budget here, but this is the live stream right here. I've got up on my other monitor. They're just like, there must be some sort of technical issue because they're not doing anything right now. We're expecting this debate to happen rather soon, so we're chilling and we're hanging out in the chat and asking questions about the budget. Is there anything in the budget that you heard about yesterday? Maybe you were here for the live stream. Maybe you've caught a couple of the videos. Maybe you've just seen it on the typical news on the TV, the radio, whatever. Is there anything there that you've heard about that you don't fully understand that you want to get more information on? We've got a little bit of a lull here in the debate, so I've got the budget up here. Why don't we find out more about it together? I haven't seen it all. It's 730 pages, man. We're trying to get through it as much as we can. But what do you guys think? What information are we missing right now? Yeah, NDP seemed quite silent. Yeah, some people, no gold. Maybe there are technical issues caused by Canada's amazing internet service provider monopoly that crashed yesterday. Oh yeah, that was a whole news story that I missed. Okay, Shay, I've got you. Try not to spam the chat there. I have to put you in a quick timeout, but we'll talk about students a little bit. Yeah, that whole thing with Rogers, right? Didn't the Rogers network go down? Like for a while, and isn't that going to like have big economic impacts? Yeah, maybe it was that. Yeah, that's certainly a problem. The ISP monopoly in Canada. Yeah, students. What happened in students was we might have things getting started here. Yeah, we are. I'll answer the question on students, then we'll flip over to this budget debate. But what happened with students is they're proposing until 2023 that federal portions of student loan interest be paused, right? So no interest on student loans. Government shouldn't be making money on students while they're trying to get a job. That's what they're saying here. And also they're doubling the amount of money that you can receive as a grant going into post-secondary, right? College and university funding from the federal government. They're going to give full-time students $6,000 now to go towards that tuition instead of the $3,000 for full-time students that it was before. So that's pretty much all of the changes we see here for students. Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff. All right, so let's flip over here because it does seem like they've gotten whatever issues they had sorted.
So as the Member of Parliament for Saginaw Preston Chesapeake, it gives me a great pleasure to speak on Budget 2021. We know this budget,
I haven't seen this guy ever before.
Speaker, is focused on finishing the fight with COVID. It's also focused on creating jobs and building back better. But
Brian,
we have
you noticed
to
I
understand
always
that
change the
COVID
Rubik's Cube. Check that out.
Affected
Always
people differently.
And there's a code to it.
It
See if you can find it.
disproportionately affected low-income workers, young people, women, racialized Canadian, certain business sectors, and those were kept in mind as we were framing up Budget 2021. Here in Nova Scotia, we have seen with this budget increases in certain areas, key areas, to support our communities. For example, we've seen some increases in equalization payments. In the Canada Health Transfer, which is so important, as you know, healthcare is number one priority for Nova Scotians. And our Canada, the social transfers also We invested in a restart agreement of $19 billion. Safe return to class fund. This one, I made an announcement last week for open space, outdoor space in schools for students. We invested as well in essential workers support fund. And as well for our communities, we have a $500 million towards community infrastructure. Here we will see projects, local projects being stimulated, local jobs being created, improving the quality of life of Nova Scotian and of all Canadians. Investments as well, as you know, in tourism, small craft harbor as well for in our fishery area. And a big one that we've been pushing for a number of years now, and my colleague MP in Cape Breton brought forward a private members bill. That's the EI sickness benefit. It was 15 weeks. We know this wasn't enough. So in this budget, we've moved that to 26 weeks. We've also, this will.
Hey Kelly, welcome to the channel members. That's awesome. Thanks for being a caring Canadian citizen. I love that when you hit the join button. I appreciate the support. It definitely helps out. Thanks, Kelly.
The Canada Cancer Society, I quote, 2021 federal budget delivers a much-needed extension to the unemployment insurance sickness benefit to support people facing the financial burden that comes with cancer diagnosis. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to touch on something extremely important. This fundamental or historic investment in child care benefit. As you know, I'm a former educator, and I know how important it is early learning to all Canadians. This investment, historic investment, will drive the economy. The growth of our economy will increase women participation in the workforce, will offer, of course, good care for our young people. This plan will see a reduction in the cost for parents of up to 50%, Madam Speaker, by 2022. And the goal is by 2026, at $10 per day on average.
So
if I quote the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour, a big win for unions with $10 a day childcare with the federal budget. Impressive investment. This is major for our country. Madam Speaker, also, I want to touch on investments for seniors. We know that seniors have had tremendous difficulty through this pandemic, and they've been isolated, and we've had to come forward. And a gap that we've noticed is long-term care, and we've lost many of our seniors to that were in long-term care, and we're investing $3 billion not only to establish standards but to apply those standards and make those standards permanent. That's extremely important, and we will move forward on that as well. We committed prior to budget 2020 that we would change the old age security to 75 years and older and increase. And we're seeing an immediate benefit.
So something I don't understand is when they're doing this, when they're doing these budget debates, how come why did liberals get the opportunity to come up here and say things? I'm not saying liberals shouldn't get a voice here. Of course they should, but they're going to be the ones responding to the questions, right? He's just going out and up here and outlining the budget. Could be helpful for people who didn't tune in yesterday to any of the news anywhere, who don't know what's in the budget. But it's kind of interesting that they spend their time this way sometimes.
Big investments
everyone in the House of Commons knows this.
We know that we invested $192 million to help with the backlog of disability claims. We've also invested $20 million in the COVID stream to help veteran organizations. But here in 2020, we're coming some more investments for veterans, $50 million over 3 years to enhance our veteran and family well-being fund. That's over and above the $3 million they're receiving per year. So that's going to be $8 million per year for the next 3 years. This is for organizations and individuals helping veterans and their families. They'll be able to apply for those funds. And I quote the Vets Canada here, who says, as part recipient under the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund, we know firsthand the importance of this investment. We've also invested $140 million over 5 years for those who have some challenges with PTSD, depressive or anxiety disorder. And while they are waiting for their benefits through disability application, they will be able to access mental health supports. And finally, Madam Speaker, extremely important is veteran homelessness, a $45 million investment to pilot a program to help support veterans through rent supplements and wraparound services such as counseling, addiction treatments, and finding.
Yeah, so what he's doing here is just saying what was just announced yesterday. Maybe bringing more attention to some of the more minor points that weren't really heavily talked about yesterday, weren't the landmark things like the childcare, the changes to the CRB, the benefits there, the changes to senior supports.
Proportionately impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. From investments in Canada, summer jobs, student grants, extending the waiver of accrual on student loans, to investments, to jobs for students, and more. We are glad to know that the government...
Yeah, Jennifer Thompson, not too fond of the legacy of debt it will leave for the next generation. I mean, it's certainly a concern. There are questions to be answered about what's going to happen, who's going to pay for the debt. The NDP want the wealthy to pay for it. The Liberals say, hey, we're going to extend our debt long-term and lock in these low interest rates, and that's how we're going to pay for it. And as we lock in that debt, the economy should grow. That's what they think. Conservatives are saying, hey, man, that's a pretty loosey-goosey metric to be using for who's going to pay for things. We want some more transparency and clarity.
For years, it's getting done. Excuse me. Lower the cost of interchange fees for merchants, and also ensuring that small business benefit from pricing that is similar.
So all respect to Daryl Sampson that is due, but this is why I couldn't be a politician, because like when I watch these before I make videos and like chop them up, what I'll usually do is like I have like a script that I can put into my Google Chrome that will allow me to watch it at like 3x or 4x speed, so I can get through hours of content to bring you all the information, but without having to watch it at snail's pace. So this sounds extra slow to me after listening to everything at 4x.
Etc. We're also looking at net zero accelerators, a $5 billion investment over 7 years to support our climate plan and support for projects that will help reduce domestic greenhouse gas investments as well, like in 2021. Proposed to reduce 50%.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the chat a little bit. I'm sure there's lots of good being said here, but we're sort of more interested in what the not what's specifically in the budget, because we've covered that a lot, but what amendments are going to be applied, what people are going to say in reaction. That's likely going to come at the next Conservative speech that's going to come up. Likely after this, maybe it'll be NDP, maybe Bloc, but they're going to probably propose some amendments. Yeah, lots of thoughts here in the chat saying like, hey, like not much for people with disability here. I believe there's something about expanding the tax credit you can get for disability, but not really the amount of it. Mostly just I'm trying to turn him down a little bit more so you can hear me. Mostly just eligibility for this disability tax credit, right? They've been trying to allow more people under more definitions of what is a disability be allowed to apply for this tax credit. So that's one of the main things in... Oh, okay. That's the end of Daryl.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
For now.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Sackville, Preston Chesetkoot, for his speech. I'm glad that he mentioned how low-income Canadians have been disproportionately hit by this pandemic. And this budget punishes them by bringing the CERB payments down from $2,000 to $1,200 a month. That's $800 a month down. And yet they miss this opportunity to let the super wealthy of Canada pay their fair share by not bringing in a wealth tax. 80% of Canadians want a wealth tax here so that the wealthy can pay their fair share. So why are the Liberals so afraid to bring in a wealth tax and let the super rich pay their fair share?
Well, Parliamentary Secretary.
The NDP's main concern.
Wealth Speaker, tax. I want to thank my colleague for his important question. I'd like to begin by saying that the National Child Care Framework investment down to $10 by 2026 will be a great help to low-income Canadians. On the tax, we have made some very important moves on that front. We will put forward a luxury tax, of course. We will also make steps moving forward towards tax evasion. And finally, we will tax the non-resident properties here in Canada. Those are big steps to move forward on that important agenda. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de
Not
Repentigny.
really any new information there.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Oh yes, I know I'm always forgetting to put my boom down. But anyway, thank you very much,
Yeah,
Madam
and all
Speaker.
these things, they always forget to put down their mic. They have they all have the same exact mic that's been sent out to them.
After a quick analysis, we can see this budget is threatening an increase in pollution. Because the money in it might ultimately be
Helmet
used to
says
support
people
technologies that
that have
haven't
survived so far on pennies, when they get
like
UBI,
small
it won't be spent on debt. It will be spent on groceries, insurance, and gas. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made there that when people who are struggling getting by get money, it's not going into investments and going into debt. It's largely would go into the economy directly. That's what many people argue, right, in favor of UBI. It's an interesting idea.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. The environment is a major priority for our government. We have taken significant steps ever since we formed government. And we are making investments that are directly
Drake isn't going to like these
focused
luxury
on
taxes.
retrofits
What are we going to do without
and investing
Drake?
in green technology.
Love him or hate
We
him,
know that
I'm
this
a fan of his music.
stimulus
but I like
used
all types of music.
for
Like, I listen to
environmental
country,
projects will
hip-hop,
benefit Canada.
everything. Pop music.
Honourable Parliamentary
Like I've always
Secretary
studied
to the
jazz.
President of the Queen's Privy Council.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm wondering if my colleague can just provide his thoughts in regards to how the budget is actually extending to September, the many different recovery emergency programs that we put in place to protect Canadians, to be there for Canadians, protect small businesses, and so forth. And if he could add his further thoughts in regards to there are many initiatives that will assist us and ultimately being able to build back better. And just to ask for his thoughts on that.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
So Jasper makes a good point in here, saying $15 per hour, which is something that was brought in as a minimum wage in this budget for only federal sectors is weak, should be for all. And there's a little bit of a change I need to talk about in there. Not a change to what it was, but it was for all federally regulated sectors. So not just like government employees, federal sectors, but also federally regulated sectors. So the sectors that the federal government has the ability to regulate, and that's going to be a lot more sectors than just the federal government, right? The government puts in rules for a lot of different industries, so likely that it will be expanded farther than you may think there, Jasper. But I'm not sure exactly which industries are fully federally regulated and will be included in that $15 minimum wage
Moving
nationally.
through the last phase, hopefully, of this challenge of COVID-19. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I want to start by acknowledging I'm speaking to you virtually in the House of Commons from my home in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking about Budget 2021, which is a historic budget also tabled in a historic manner by Canada's first ever female finance minister. And what a budget it is, Madam Speaker. It canvasses a wide number of areas, and I propose to go through some of them, but not all of them, because there is so many supports that are literally contained therein. I'm going to pick up on the environment, which is a subject matter that my colleague, the member from that part of Nova Scotia, just left off on, which is the environment. We know as a government and as a party that climate change is real. We've taken serious measures to act on climate change.
That's a little bit of a shot at the Conservative government back at the policy convention. It made headlines that they didn't vote on a measure that would add climate change is real into the Conservative policy officially. There has been other things added to the policy that would suggest that climate change is real inside the Conservative policy. So I think the news about this was a little bit overblown, but it did make some serious headlines.
Levels would be reduced by as much as 36%. And I outlined this number right at the outset because we heard a lot from criticism, sometimes very constructive criticism by opposition parliamentarians and others, that we need to set targets that are more ambitious, particularly more ambitious than the Harper Conservative government that we succeeded. And we have done that by setting targets of around 32% this past December, and now setting a path to getting to 36% in reduction.
With all the environmental talk, Gerald, let's invest in tulip bulbs. Maybe that's the good investment going
really critical,
forwards.
Madam Speaker. We're doing that by increasing the dollars that we are putting in. So there's $15 billion of new money that was allocated in 2020 at the end of December. And in the most recent budget, there's an additional $17.6 billion that is being dedicated towards the green recovery. And in particular, I'm going to highlight one other feature, Madam Speaker, which is the Net Zero Accelerator. And what that does is it allows companies to invest in how they can reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions. We put $3 billion into that accelerator in last December's announcement made by the Minister and the Prime Minister, and we're adding another $5 billion in this announcement. On top of all of that, Madam Speaker, there's also money that is put in place to help us achieve our land conservation and marine conservation targets of 25% of areas by 2025. So that is simply just on the environmental piece, Madam Speaker, and the budget also outlined, again, reaffirming.
There's lots of people, Ruby, saying that people on ODSP welfare are not being touched. We don't exist. I believe that in this federal budget, that's I think ODSP is just for Ontario, right? Ontario Disability. I forget the acronym, but I think that the federal government can't really change those programs. They could create their own to help a similar base of people, but I think you'd largely have to look at your provincial government when it comes to any changes for people in those situations on those provincial programs.
Progressive policies about issues that affect them and affect this part of Toronto, and climate and housing are at the top of the agenda in almost all conversations I have with my constituents. I'm very pleased to say that not only is this budget responding to those concerns of my constituents that I've advocated for with the Minister of Finance and with the Prime Minister, it is responding not just to the environmental concerns, but also to the housing concerns. How is it doing that, Madam Speaker? Well, what we are doing is we are planning to invest an additional $2.5 billion in housing. And what does that look like, Madam Speaker? Well, $2.5 billion looks like an additional $1.5 billion for the Rapid Housing Initiative. This has landed with resounding success around the country, particularly in my city of Toronto, because what it allows us to do is to build housing and build it quickly so that we actually meet the very short supply of affordable housing in cities like mine. And because of the resounding success of the Rapid Housing Initiative over the last...
This is a lot of talk, right? Like they talk about implementing these rapid housing initiatives, creating more housing for people, specifically in these high density areas. But when it comes to the affordability crisis that's currently going on in real estate, I think that really hasn't been touched here, right? Now, it's not necessarily a good idea for the government to even implement anything. Like, I'm not going to be the one to tell you what's a good idea, what's not, right? That's for you to decide. But when asked about the housing, the lack of housing measures inside of this budget, in a press conference yesterday that I was watching after all of the budget came out, Chrystia Freeland sort of said, hey, we're looking at the off-seas changes that they're going to make to the housing market and following that closely. And that was all she said. If you don't know, off-seas wanted to lower the buying power of people by implementing a higher degree of a mortgage stress test. Essentially, if you could afford $1 million home before, now you'd only be able to afford a $950,000 home. So it's like a 5%, I believe. Yeah, that. Or is that 5%? Yeah, 5% change in buying power. So really, I don't think it's going to make a big change, but that's what I guess Chrystia Freeland is depending on when it comes to this housing problem. Really not much for the housing affordability issues that are going on.
Many of us are working from home right now. That trend will continue even as we exit out of this pandemic. That is liberated office space in cities like mine, like in Toronto. And what we propose in this budget is to support the conversion of some of that empty office space into affordable housing. And that's exactly what we'll do with this budget. Madam Speaker, the next subject I want to touch upon is really the flagship policy that is in this budget. And you heard the Minister of Finance articulate this quite clearly. She talked about the fact that childcare has arisen as an issue that has really climbed to the forefront. And I say this painfully aware of my gender, Madam Speaker, aware of the fact that it is men like me that have all of a sudden been sensitized to this priority. During this pandemic. I'm a man who has got his kids at home as we speak right now. They're about 15 feet away from me, going through online schooling, etc. And men like me have been challenged over these past 15 months. And I think that's a good thing because it's raised awareness about the importance of it.
Ryan a little while ago said, you need to marry a Forex/crypto/stocks trader. I think they'll have more money. Well, there's definitely an argument that asset inflation is a real thing. And I think that, like, if you've been watching my stream, I'm so frustrated with the lack of financial education that Canada gives its citizens, and I think that should be a real priority going forward, like increasing the financial education that people are given when it comes to money and investing in personal finance and saving and how to save more, spend less, earn more, invest more, right? I think this is the formula to solving many of life's problems, right? People say, hey, Russell, you care too much about money and making money and investing so much. Like what's really important in life? And to that I say, hey, having a little bit more money, a little bit more stability, a little bit more time that you can buy with your money, well, that gives you the ability to spend time with your family, spend time with your friends, work on your health, these things that are actually important in life. So I think money is a means to an end for that. But all that from saying, investing in the future and learning about that is definitely something that I think
under
is
Paul
important.
Martin and Ken Dryden's tenure around circa 2005. And that was a minority parliament that saw a universal childcare plan actually defeated, unfortunately, which led us to 9 years of Stephen Harper's Conservatives. I'm very hopeful that we don't see a repeat of that kind of history. And instead, in this minority parliament, we can see this important goal get across the finish line. What will it mean? It'll mean a 50% reduction in childcare costs as early as the end of next year, and getting childcare costs to literally $10 a day by 2025. Madam Speaker, I saw your signal, and I've figured out Zoom enough to know how to pin you on my screen. So I know I've got 2 minutes. In these last 2 minutes, what I want to do is just canvass some of the proposals that deal with systemic racism and systemic discrimination, a subject near and dear to my heart as a person of color, as somebody who believes in human rights and equality. What this budget will do, it will be transformative for Black entrepreneurs, for Black business owners, for Indigenous persons that want a firmer commitment.
Ninja, that's a really good point. Ninja says, what if the government is preying on having a financially uneducated public? I mean, not to get too tinfoil hatty, but not everybody can know everything about the financial system and still want to work some of the jobs that people largely don't want to work, right? And the other tricky thing about financial education in schools is that a lot of this is when you implement education into schools, a lot of the curriculum is based on the past 10, 20 years, 30 years. Maybe the people developing it are 50 or 60 years old, so they're giving you all this financial advice that would apply 30 years ago, 40 years ago when they made their wealth, right? But is that really applicable to today, right? This is another problem with education in general, is that you have this struggle to get an up-to-date and actually accurate education system because of how slowly it's rolled out, right? I think that you can learn more from watching YouTube videos about personal finance than I think the education system could provide. There's so many great educational financial channels out there. I follow some Steph and Den are great. They're in Toronto. They're younger and talking about finance and investing.
I say very firmly we cannot afford it.
Lots of great YouTubers starting to cover this sort of stuff.
Speaker. I'm open for questions.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in this election budget tabled yesterday by the Minister of Finance, there are 3 things missing. 3 things that were included in the Minister's mandate letter: to avoid creating new permanent spending, to review the debt management strategy, and to create new budget targets. Could my colleague specify what is meant by fiscal anchors? Where are they in yesterday's budget? And would these would this correspond with a fiscal anchor mentioned in the minister's budget in mandate letter? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. I'll try to answer in French. Regarding the mandate for the Minister of Finance, what I can say
people are frustrated that Christopher
the
Freeland's
minister has
created new
already raised
spending.
during the question
The fact that there's no real fiscal anchor, the only thing that they're using to say that, hey, we can actually afford all of this money is the fact that they're measuring it of gross domestic product, like the growth in Canada's productivity, and like how many more jobs they're creating, more goods and services are being sold in Canada. This is gross domestic product on a national scale, and the portion of our debt in comparison to that gross domestic product, right? They're saying gross domestic product is going to go up faster than the debt is, and that's why this is okay to spend this much money. That's the only fiscal anchor they've used. Conservatives aren't happy with that answer.
The honourable member for Montcalm. I couldn't hear you, Madam Speaker, but I think it's my turn. My colleague ended his speech by saying that we simply can't do nothing. Well then, why did his government decide to do nothing about the situation of non-COVID patients who, in the next decade, will ultimately become the principal victims of this pandemic? Let me give an example. In gastroenterology.
Yeah, Alicia, that's absolutely wild. Alicia says, I learned how to do taxes in school. It was a life skills course that they tried to not allow me into because it was for remedial. So they're saying like, oh, because you are more on like a university route potentially, that you shouldn't be taking this course in tax. That's silly, right? Like, everyone should be prioritizing financial education as the top tier thing because it's what's going to affect your life more than that, right? That's frustrating.
That would have enabled the government to care for these people. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I'd like to thank my colleague for Montcalm for his question. As raised during debate already today, what I would answer is the following. It is not at all true that we are not assisting with provincial health systems. We are there when it comes to mental health. We are there when it comes to funding long-term care institutions.
In terms of the previous investments we have made for healthcare, in terms of the Safe Restart agreements and other allocations we've made for care for elderly and for home care, which is important.
Madame la Présidente, il n'y a pas de traduction.
I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm not getting interpretation. I heard my colleague's question.
Okay, some tech issues. This happens all the time in the House of Commons. Like, I feel like the government for a country, you can't get your Zoom sorted out. Come on, guys. Well, I guess people are a little bit older generally in the House of Commons, so maybe they're having some struggles with the Zoom tech. We'd think at this point, right? Minnie says, personal finance I took in grade 10 was all formulas, nothing for real life. Yeah, that's frustrating too. It's you got to worry about the applicable things that are actually going to be applied to your life. And like, there's no investing education in schools, right? And this is something that is going to protect people against their savings diminishing with potential inflation over time. Like, the Bank of Canada wants 2% inflation every single year. This is, of course, their target, but that means that people's savings are losing 2% in value every single year. So if you're not investing and learning about this stuff, it's frustrating, and it should be in the schools, right?
And I thank the member for Parkdale High Park for his speech.
Yeah, Gerald says, don't be ageist. Hey, I love people of all ages. I'm just saying some might be better at tech than others.
Let me reassure them that you Democrats know that a budget is a confidence question, and we have reassured Canadians that we will not force them into an election in this third wave of the pandemic. But that's why I'm quite disappointed that the Liberals have put some things in this budget they know New Democrats would not normally support. So my question to the member is, does he actually support cutting the emergency benefit by 40%? I have many people in my riding who work in the tourism industry. The tourism season is not coming back this year for the second year in a row, and they're forced to depend on that emergency benefit. It's going to go from $2,000 a month to $1,200. How are they expected to survive on that pittance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, 15 seconds.
So I thank the member for his question, and I think what's important is that the benefits are continuing all the way to September 25th, but they're doing so on a sliding scale. And I think the phase out is an important aspect in terms of addressing people's needs as they decrease. But what I would reassure him is that we've been dynamic in our responses to the pandemic thus far, and we will continue to be dynamic as the case requires. Merci.
Okay, so that answer kind of is about the CRB being lowered down to to $200 or $300 per week eventually. And he's saying that, hey, they're going to still be dynamic about it. So maybe that won't actually happen, depending on the data and what the current economic environment looks like. Maybe they're going to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to that, based on that answer, at least.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, today I will share my time with the Honourable Member for Carleton.
Chair, Madam Speaker, I want to talk about the basics, because I think the basics are sometimes lost. And seeing yesterday's budget, I think there were a lot of basics that were lost. But let's start with the definition of budget from my honourable colleagues. A budget is an estimation of revenue and expenses over a specified future period of time, and is usually compiled and reevaluated on a periodic basis. To manage expenses, prepare for unpredictable events, and be able to afford big ticket items without going into debt, budgeting is important. Keeping track of how much you earn and spend doesn't have to be drudgery, doesn't require to be good at math, and doesn't mean you can't buy the things you want. It just means you'll know where your money goes, you'll have greater control over your finances. Aside from earmarking resources, a budget can also aid in setting goals, measuring outcomes, and planning for contingencies.
Yeah, we're getting a personal finance lecture.
A budget deficit occurs when expenses exceed revenue and indicate the financial health of a country. Accrued deficits form national debt. In cases where a budget deficit is identified, current expenses exceed the amount of income received through standard operations.
Did you see that?
A nation wishing to correct its budget deficit may need to cut back on certain expenditures, increase revenue-generating activities, or employ a combination of the two. Certain unanticipated events and policies may cause budget deficits. One of the primary dangers of a budget deficit is inflation, which is the continuous increase of price levels. Continued budget deficits can lead to inflationary monetary policies year after year. A nation can print additional currency to cover payments on debts by issuing securities such as treasury bills and bonds. While this provides a mechanism to make payments, it does carry the risk of devaluing the nation's currency, which can lead to hyperinflation. Now, why do governments run deficits?
$4 billion
Well, a
a
budget
week are being
deficit
printed right now by the
planned
Bank of
to be
Canada.
this large is based on two things: tolerance from taxpayers and financial institutions that bear the risk, and the notion of not having to pay back temporary support mechanisms. In effect, leading up to a federal election, this government doesn't want to take away the sugar bowl, but there is guaranteed to be a hangover from this sugar high. The national debt is simply the net accumulation of the federal government's annual budget deficits. It is the total amount of money that the federal government owes to its creditors. And that amount has gone from $700 billion 2 years ago, approximately, to $1.2 trillion at this point.
Expected to go to 1.4
debt
soon.
to GDP. This is a ratio of a country's national debt to the level of
Hey, Frank,
economic
how's it going?
activity
Good
in
to see
that
you in
country. It's a meaningless ratio that was put in place at a time when the world's central bankers could no longer find the tools to balance national budgets.
Are they talking
The
about
concept
quantitative
of
easing
permanent
here?
national debt, permanently paying institutions with taxpayer
I find
funds,
this interesting.
became accepted by the world's bankers,
If they just presented
both
it
private and
a
public.
little more in
The
an
concept
interesting way. I
upended
think
the
I'm a
very
little more-
notion of Keynesianism, where governments were encouraged to spend in bad times and repay that spending in good times, thus maintaining equilibrium in labor and price levels in society. It was also a measure of comparing bad fiscal regimes with other bad fiscal regimes, as in, we're in bad shape, but as a function of our GDP, we're not in as bad shape as those other guys, which is a ridiculous point, given that every national economy and democratic and financial structure are different. Cette stratégie peut être résumée dans la
But
province.
there's certainly overlap
strategy-
between those systems.
May be summed up by saying that those who compare themselves feel better.
The equivalent. However, these entities deliver value to the shareholders by maintaining a balance of risk, as in too much debt and interest payments, and return. In addition, companies can expense debt before calculating taxes, the amount they owe the government for their profits. Do governments pay taxes and have a favorable application of carrying debt on their balance sheet? No. It is only a burden transferred from today's taxpayers to tomorrow's taxpayers, or in this government's approach, when things really go south down the road, and then in a huge problem scenario. The risk borne here is multiplying, and the bearers of that risk are future taxpayers. Moral hazard.
Moral hazard exists when a party to a contract takes risks.
That's an interesting point that he's making, certainly saying, hey, we're just kicking the can down the road. Future taxpayers are going to have to pay for all of this. But he also says that inflation is a concern. But as we know, inflation on anyone's debt is a net positive force on people who have debt because their debt is now worth less. And it's a smaller debt in proportion to the value of the currency, right? So I think that this might be the government's strategy. Hey, we're going to push out the term of our debt. If we see inflation, our debt goes down in comparison to the currency. So interesting points he's bringing up.
Canada's forecast annual deficit for last year improved by $35 billion from the fall economic statement. That's extra funds that arrived in taxation revenue from businesses restarting mid-pandemic, and Canadians getting back to work to pay government taxes. Much of that arrived from Canada's traditional strengths, mining, energy.
Hey, George, welcome to the community. George 1511, awesome. George, thanks for hitting that join button and becoming a caring Canadian citizen. It's awesome. Everyone give George some love in the chat. Thanks, George. Appreciate that.
Jobs coming back to Canada, giving these results that are already arriving. Last year's deficit number is $354 billion. For one level of government, the federal government, whose annual revenue is usually about that amount. So $2 were spent for every dollar brought in a normal year, but even more from a year when government revenues were down by around 8%, to deal with the health and economic effects of a historic pandemic. Well, okay. And to build back better and to reimagine Canada's economy. These empty slogans represent nothing but political jingoism. Canada's deficit in 2019, $27 billion in a $2.3 trillion economy.
This is the most thorough, and backed up financial criticism we've heard yet.
Economic boom, Canada was overspending by 8.3%. Here's the rationale from the Liberal Prime Minister about running deficits in boom times. On March 21st, 2016, in this House, Mr. Speaker, record low levels of interest rates right now mean that this is an opportunity to invest in our future. This is what we are delivering to grow the economy and help the middle class. In contrast, in this year's budget announcement, the Minister of Finance said the following: the best way to pay our debts is to grow our economy. In fact, in today's low interest rate environment, not only can we afford these investments, it would be short-sighted of us not to make them. Now, by investments, of course, they mean government spending. Clearly at odds, these two, Madam Speaker, but it is obvious that neither this Prime Minister nor this Finance Minister understand the notion of financial risk. And clearly, this Liberal government will justify spending taxpayer funds in good times, and to spend taxpayer, it begs the question, what times are not good for overspending taxpayer funds? The forecast budget deficit for this fiscal year coming, according to yesterday's budget, $154.7 billion. That is almost $50 billion higher than forecast in the fall economic statement, despite last year's revenues outperforming by $35 billion since the fall. Planned spending represents an increase of $136 billion in planned spending over the next 5 years, in addition to the $548 billion in spending forecast in the fall economic statement. How is this justified? These deficits accumulate to an ongoing debt to GDP ratio at 50% going forward. So the plan, the fiscal anchor, is to maintain Canada's debt at half the size of our economy for the foreseeable future. Is that an anchor?
That's what.
The better our economy performs, the deeper in debt we get to go. We say in finance that every economic forecast is wrong. From the moment it is written, and rightly so, things change. And getting close based on discipline and unforeseen extraneous events coming at you spells success. There is none of that in this budget. There is no security for our children. There is multiplying risk. It's our job to leave this country in better shape than we found it. Fiscally, and in so many other ways, we are failing. C'est notre devoir de laisser ce pays.
It is our duty to leave this country in better shape than we found it. Financially, and in many other regards, we are failing.
Well, the Minister of Finance spoke about taxing.
Hey, thanks, Frank, for that. Thanks for being a great support, Frank. You're the best. Thanks for sending that sticker. I appreciate you. Again, nobody ever feel obligated to send anything like that, but I appreciate you, Frank. Again, guys, some love in the chat for Frank. Thanks for that. Hope you're having a great Tuesday here, Frank.
The Minister of Finance has followed our lead in applying an investment tax credit on carbon credit utilization and storage.
Go to questions.
Oh, he's getting.
We have to go to questions and comments. The honorable.
Okay, I want to pause here to talk a little bit about what he just said. There's some interesting points there, right? Interesting points. He's concerned about inflation. He says that this could be a problem if we have too many deficits going into the future. He says, hey, why are we measuring how far we're allowed to go into debt based on what our economy is doing on a GDP level? He's saying we're just going to keep it at 50% of our GDP over time. That's the amount of debt we're allowed to go into. That's kind of like a sliding scale. It's going to always a debt's going to go up as their GDP goes up. Is that what we want to tie it as our fiscal spending to? That's what he's saying. Well, it's debated whether or not you think that's a good fiscal anchor or not. Yeah, very, very interesting stuff there from him. Like, that's the first sort of put together monetary policy response that we've actually gotten when it comes to this budget. We've heard other conservatives saying, hey, we're spending too much, just like ringing alarm bells. But he's sort of saying here, at least his thesis is, we think that we should not be spending this much. We should be taking care of our future by not spending so much right now, not putting our grandchildren into debt. Now, but there are arguments to be made that Chrysler Freeland might have done something that's not entirely horrible, right? Right now we have the lowest interest rates that anyone's ever seen. Well, most people have ever seen here in Canada. Like, the interest rates are so incredibly low. That's why you're seeing so much growth in the housing market, right? The interest rates are being artificially pushed down by the Bank of Canada's quantitative easing program. We're not going to get into the details of how exactly that works, but they're printing money, lowering down interest rates by buying Bank of Canada bonds. And so their interest rates are super low right now. So the government's saying, hey, when are we ever going to see interest rates this low? We're going to take advantage of it. If we're going to spend, now's the time to spend, because our interest rates are so low and they can lock in those interest rates. So that's where the debate is. Is it fiscally wise to spend all of this money at these extremely low interest rates that we can lock in now, instead of waiting until interest rates are higher and we're going to have to pay more for our debt? Or should we just not be taking on the debt at all? Like, these are the discussions we have to have. I'm not smart enough to tell you the answer. This is why I couldn't be a politician. People say, oh, Russell, why don't you go into politics? I don't know what's right. I don't think I'm smart enough to know all of the long-term effects of the decisions that people are making, right? But all we can do is stay as informed as we possibly can and come up with our own opinions about it. But I just don't think I'm smart enough to really have an opinion and really know what's right for our country. That's where I stand. I just think I'm not smart enough for this stuff to really know where everything's going. I don't know. What do you guys think about it? We'll flip back over here.
Member for Kingston and the Islands.
CBC Boutique.
The Minister of Finance.
We'll try to get to the proper
credit
point.
I do admire, though, my Conservative colleagues, and I know the member from Carleton has spent a lot of time talking about the price on pollution. I admire their willingness to come in here and try to defend such a plan after 5 years of talking about how price on pollution wasn't the right way. And now they have this grand plan of putting your money into a savings account and then letting you choose from the CPC boutique what you'd like to spend. But the reality is, Madam Speaker, that's not a plan to fight pollution. That's not a plan to price carbon. That's just Conservatives trying to give to people who are wealthy and to people who have money to make sure that they can keep the money in their pocket, rather than making sure that we take all the funds and distribute it equally as we're currently doing.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Oh, I thank the member from Kingston and the Islands for pointing out my stumble, and thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to correct it. I'm pleased that the Minister of Finance has followed our lead in applying an investment tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, one of Canada's most tangible opportunities to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. A 90-day consultation period has been announced, and I encourage the government to consider the benefits associated with enhanced oil recovery as part of that strategy, as it is in the United States, and to move toward an environmental strategy that halts the flow of jobs and investments, including technological advancements like carbon capture, to foreign jurisdictions with no positive effect on the environment. Canada needs regulatory certainty, particularly regarding our environmental objectives. Having a carbon capture strategy that moves jobs and investment to our largest trading partner is not a viable environmental strategy for Canada. I encourage the Minister of Finance to get this right so that it actually results in effective policy. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member Avignon Matapédia. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I'd like to hear what he has to say about the aid for seniors in this budget. The government deliberately chose to create two classes of seniors by increasing OAS at age 75 rather than 65, which creates injustice for thousands of seniors in this country. In addition, there's a one-time $500 payment at a very funny time at the end of the summer, maybe right before an election. Oh. So according to my colleague, are the Liberals playing politics at the expense of Quebec and Canada's seniors? The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Well, I thank my colleague very much for the question. It is strange the timing of all the expenses that seem to be flowing out of the Liberals at this point in time and attaching themselves to the budget. There is something that we need to do for our seniors. The pandemic has exposed one thing, and that is how we have had a hole in the health treatment of our seniors that we did not pay enough attention to. Adjusting those structural problems going forward is fundamentally important. And we've noticed for a long time that seniors at all levels require more support in our society. I'm not sure the OAS, the old age security, is the best way of approaching that, but I do think it should be examined with all the tools we have in our kit. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke.
Gerald, that's a really good point. That we should emphasize too much negativity. I woke up today and had a hot shower and then a cold glass of iced water. Still luxuries in most of the world. Proud and grateful to be Canadian. Yeah, that is an important perspective to have from time to time, like how grateful we are to be in this country. You know, I am a proud Canadian. I criticize the government when it comes to things. I criticize all these politicians with what they're saying sometimes. But at the end of the day, Canada, in my eyes, is a pretty great place to live when compared to many other places in the world, and it's important to be grateful for that.
Deny that assistance, which the Conservatives seem to favor, or we can put in place a tax on those who have made excess profits during the pandemic. The ultra rich, we can restore corporate income tax rates to their levels from 30 years ago, which the Conservatives and Liberals both cut. So which is it? Do the Conservatives want to deny Canadians the aid they need in order to maintain a balanced budget? Or are they prepared to join New Democrats in calling for a wealth and excess profits tax?
Honourable Member for Calgary Centre, 15 seconds.
Well, I appreciate the question from my colleague, and I would say that we are very much engaged with the government on the changes that we brought to them on the emergency wage subsidy. We're very happy that they were able to deliver those to Canadians that needed those during the pandemic. It's something that we're quite proud of as a caucus and as a party, that we actually were able to deliver aid after the Liberals had initially put forward a package that we were able to.
That brings us to resuming debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Carleton. I'm going to...
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. No offence taken. Today
inflammatory comments, whether you love him or hate him, he always stirs things up. That's for sure.
To a once again renewed popular idea called modern monetary theory. We should put modern in quotation marks because it's a very old idea. Thousands of years old, if the truth be told. But once again, it is being presented as new. And it is this. It is the idea that governments can spend as much as they want, and to pay for it, they simply print the cash. They create the money because, of course, the bank which they own, in our case the Bank of Canada, has a monopoly on the creation of that currency, so why not just create more money in order to spend it? The only limit on the amount that can be spent is when said money creation leads to inflation, at which point modern monetary theorists say the solution is to simply raise taxes in order to reduce the demand that was driving up the inflation in the first place. So once that printed money, too much of it starts chasing too few goods, the government taxes the money back and slows down the inflation. So effectively, it is a roundabout way to massively expand government up front while claiming there's no cost, and then when prices spiral out of control, to try and tax them back into submission. Now, this government, this finance minister has claimed she doesn't believe in modern monetary theory, but we have to suspect that she believes in some version of it, because she has imposed literally no limit whatsoever on her spending in the form of a fiscal anchor. The only difference between her version of monetary theory and its original theorists is that the original proponent said the bank should simply give the money to the government in order to spend, whereas under the current model this government has set up,
through
the bank
big banks
sells the debt to the marketplace and then buys it right back at a higher price only weeks later, to the great profit of the investors with whom they carried out that transaction. Now, all this sounds magical, creating something from nothing. But as it has been said, there is nothing new except what is forgotten. I quote Reinhardt and Rogoff, two Harvard professors that have studied 800 years of debt crises, and they say, and I quote, "Early on across the world, as already noted, the main device for defaulting on government obligations was that of debasing the content of the coinage. Modern currency presses are just a technologically advanced and efficient approach to achieving the same end." Perhaps the most creative of all of the modern monetary theorists was the Emperor Dionysius from 2,500 years ago. He thought it was a modern idea then, too. He was the dictator of the city-state of Syracuse. And of course, because of all of his sumptuous living and his ridiculous war fighting, he needed cash. So he took the drachmas from his people, and every one drachma he stamped with a 2. And all of a sudden, he had twice as much money.
The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
I just want to know, Madam Speaker, if there's going to be a test on this history lesson afterwards, and if I should be expecting that to come when the member's done.
Hardly a point of order. The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, the test has been running for 4 years now, and they've been getting an F year after year after year. So, yes, indeed. But Dionysius, he gets an A for creativity. He took 1 drachma coins, stamped them with 2, and all of a sudden had twice as much money. But of course, all of the workers of his city-state were earning half as much in real terms, because everything costs twice as much when you double the amount of currency in circulation. Throughout the Napoleonic Wars, the exact same thing happened. The amount of silver in the average coin dropped by 2/3 during Napoleon's reign, because all of the emperors and kings were trying to debase their coinage in order to fund their wars. And of course, their people became much poorer because their money did not go as far. And then the most recent and most extreme case was that of Germany in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. After the war was done, there was 10 times as much paper currency in circulation as immediately before the war. The result was hyperinflation. People needed wheelbarrows to carry their cash off to the baker in order to buy just 1 loaf of bread. And if you
We're going to continue. I want to give my a little bit of background on this so that you can enjoy, or or not enjoy is not the right word, so that you can have the context of what he's talking about here. There's a lot of debate whether or not we're going to see hyperinflation in Canada and across the world, as many governments have implemented quantitative easing programs that has, to simplify this, essentially printed billions, if not trillions of dollars of money that wasn't there anymore. Well, nowadays we don't actually print the money. We just type in a 0 on the bank systems, and now that money's there, right? So there's lots of concern that there's going to be inflation because of all this money printing, right? More money in the system means people will pay more for the same goods. The price of those goods goes up, and as a result, we have to pay more over time for the goods that we need, and the value of our currency is diminished, right? This is the idea. But there's questions right now on if we're even going to see inflation, right? We have the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. This is essentially a basket of goods. Like they go to Walmart, grab a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's the same every single time, but they measure this over the course of time. And if the CPI goes up, well, then that's their Consumer Price Index, CPI. That's their target. That's what they're using to measure inflation. Right now, the Bank of Canada has a mandate to keep inflation around 2%. They say a little bit of inflation is actually good for the economy. We want this. Right now, inflation is under 2% based on the CPI data, the Consumer Price Index data. But inside of that CPI, there's not a lot of measuring of things like assets, like real estate and stocks, right? Largely things that have done pretty well throughout the beginning of the pandemic. Just look at the housing market, right? Some people say, hey, why are you only using the CPI to measure inflation? So right now, there's concerns. People are saying, are we even seeing inflation? The CPI data doesn't say so, but then others say, well, we've seen it in the assets and we've seen it in other things like lumber that aren't as heavily weighted in the CPI. So this is the context and the debate that's going on. Are we going to see big time inflation in the future, or are we not going to see it, right? The Bank of Canada is not doing anything to slow this potential inflation. We're going to be live streaming tomorrow the Bank of Canada's announcement on their interest rate policy, which could lead to them either printing more or less money in the future. So stay tuned for that. I think that's going to be tomorrow morning, I think around 11 o'clock, but I should have the thing up on the video rather soon. But that's a little bit of context on what's going on here, and let's listen back in.
You went to the bar to get a beer. You ordered all of your evening's drinks at once, because if you even waited a few hours, the beer would be more expensive. So it was a good investment to load up your table right when you got there, immediately after work, in order to save a fortune.
The Bank of Canada, is supposed to be separate from the government.
That inflation will never happen
but the
here.
finance minister
all
can
these
change
things
what their
about
mandate
printing
is.
money causing inflation, that's old thinking. Remember, history doesn't repeat itself, Madam Speaker, except that it's already repeating itself. Let's start with housing prices. From December 2019, the last month before COVID started to circulate in Canada, to March 2021, the average house went from $518,000 to $716,000.
It's been nuts.
Massive 38%
I'm a realtor
increase
in the Greater Toronto area,
a
so
time
I've seen it
when the
firsthand.
economy dropped by $120 billion. So the economy goes down, but somehow housing prices go up. Lumber prices are up 118%. Here's a quote from a contractor. Oh, it's ridiculous. A 2x4 used to be $3.50. Now they're going for $9.80. A sheet of plywood was $12 2 years ago. Now it's $56. Here's a quote from the Financial Post just yesterday. Central bank and government out of touch with Main Street when it comes to the rising cost of living. The latest Canada's food price report shows that food costs increased by 2.7% last year, with an expected 4.5 to 6.5% increase in meat, 3.5 to 5.5% increase in bakery, and 4.5 to 6.5 increase in vegetables. Gas prices, well, they've gone from 78 cents a liter to $1.18 a liter. So all of these things are rising vastly more than the target of the Bank of Canada. And what's interesting about the Bank of Canada is I asked about the core rate of inflation when the governor of the bank appeared at the Finance Committee not so long ago. And he said, well, don't worry about core inflation. We only worry about CPI. Well, I'll tell you something. I have a prediction. This month, CPI will be way above the 2% target. And I make another prediction.
That's a little bit of like an interesting prediction, because I think he's like sort of trying to project or predict that this CPI data is, of course, going to be higher this upcoming month. But it's kind of like he knows it will be. And is saying this to kind of sound good a little bit, because when they compare CPI data, they compare it to a year ago, right? They compare it to a year ago. Now we had very, very low inflation as of March, right? March and April when the pandemic was just starting. So if you compare that data, the data from the beginning of the pandemic to this March and this April, well, of course, you're going to see a huge percentage growth in inflation in the CPI. So whether or not that inflation sticks around for the long term, we really need to look at the month-to-month changes in inflation when it comes to the percentage, not the year-to-year, because this is a pretty crazy year.
That the Bank of Canada will suddenly say, oh, don't worry about CPI, we use core inflation. So whatever is lowest is the measurement that they use. But here's the consequence of all of these numbers. When governments print money, they drive up the price of two things. One, the things that the rich own. And two, the things that everyone else buys. So if you are a millionaire mansion owner, you're getting extremely rich. Your house is making a lot more money than you are. You're sitting in your rocking chair and cash is just falling out of your attic on your head. But if you are a working class person who rents in order to have a roof overhead, your rent is going up, your food is going up, your gas is going up, everything you buy is going up, except your wages are not. And guess what? That dream of owning a house, it's getting further and further away because of asset price inflation.
So Pierre Poilievre, I disagree with him on some things and I agree with him on other things. Like any politician, I see both sides of this stuff. But what he's saying here is it is happening, right? We're seeing asset prices skyrocket. We're seeing the housing prices go up. Where people who have invested and have focused on saving more, investing more, pushing more and more money into their investments, they've done well throughout the pandemic. And based on the policy going forward across the world, not just Canada, and if you read Noah Yuval Harari, love his books, he largely predicts as well, too, that there's going to be just even more separation between the ultra-wealthy and the people who aren't so much. And I think that's awful. I think that's sad. And I think that shouldn't be the way that things are. But this is the world that we're living in. So I encourage everyone to learn more about personal finance and investing and how to do these things. Minor plug, I just made a course that's sort of going to cover this sort of stuff, all the stuff that should have been taught in high school when it comes to this. So if you're interested in it, check it out, but no pressure. But I want to tell you, everyone I think should be prioritizing learning how to invest, because based on the direction the world's going, the money printing, it pays to be invested.
So what we actually have is a government that claims it's doing all of this deficit spending to help the less fortunate, are actually carrying out one of the largest wealth transfers from the working class to the super rich, from the have-nots to the have-yachts in Canadian history. The solution to this is to control the spending, unleash free market production, replace the credit card economy with a paycheck economy, and restore the principle of sound money so that the dollars that people earn are worth what they're supposed to be worth, and that people get ahead through their labor and their effort, not through their privilege and their aristocracy. Thank you.
You know, that's that's an interesting take from Pierre Poilievre. Typically very, very loved by conservatives, but he's pointing out things that people that largely support the NDP are also pointing out or ringing the alarm bells about. It seems the conservatives on the right of the political spectrum and the NDPs on the left are kind of saying the same thing in different words. We're seeing wage inequality. We're seeing wealth gaps. People can't buy homes. It's not affordable anymore for people. So it is really interesting to see two different political parties say the same thing in slightly different ways. Like the way they want to go about tackling this issue is a little bit different, but they're both ringing the same alarm bells. It's a really interesting time we're living in that this is like a large concern for everybody.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Queen's Privy Council.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And you know, it's interesting. We have, on the one hand, through the pandemic, learned that we needed to be there in a very real and tangible way for Canadians. That's why we came up with the programs of the emergency wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, the business account, the credit availability program, the CERB program. Over 9 million Canadians putting money in the pockets of people during a difficult time. If we didn't do that, we would have far more issues related to bankruptcies, personal financial problems, all sorts of issues. Government made the decision to go ahead and spend the money that was necessary. Will the Conservative Party come clean with Canadians and indicate clearly, do they support those initiatives to have the backs of Canadians? And if so, how can they honestly be critical of the fact that we need to borrow money?
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, I regret that this government made it necessary through its mismanagement of the pandemic to plunge so deeply into this deficit. They made it necessary by leaving the borders open and allowing 60,000 people to enter from China after the military had warned that there was a pandemic brewing in that country. They made it necessary by failing to deliver rapid testing that could have allowed businesses to reopen months before they did. And they're making it necessary now because they have failed to deliver vaccines that are widely available around the world. Just yesterday, images splashed across the internet of pubs opening in London, England, of flights going back and forth seamlessly between New Zealand and Australia, of countries all around the world returning to normal, people returning to work, while here in Canada, we're locked in our basements and we're terrified of a new third wave that is the result of this government's failures. We wish they hadn't made these deficits necessary.
I'll be right back. It's time for a coffee break for me. I'm going to grab it and make a coffee. Join me if you haven't already. Grab a coffee, grab a beer. Hey, grab something else if you look at the calendar today, and I'll be back in like 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for Carleton, for his Economy Lesson 101. However, I would have liked to have heard him speak about the health transfers that were completely ignored by the Liberals in this budget. What does my honourable colleague think of that? Thank you.
L'honorable député de Carleton.
The honourable member for Carleton. I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. I know that the Bloc wants the federal government to get more involved in health transfers, and it's another example of where I see that the Bloc Québécois is pro-government intervention, whereas I think that the provinces should be able to spend their own money without any federal interference, and the governments that are the closest to the people should have the greatest amount of power. Thank you.
For London, Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I appreciate some of the points that my honourable colleague had made. I know certainly in my riding, people, they have less to get by. They're terrified that they can't make their mortgage payments. They can't make their rent payments. Those skyrocketing housing prices are leaving them out of any sort of dream of owning a home or keeping it. And I've heard from seniors in particular who they don't know where to turn and they're in fear of losing their home. The government in this budget have split those who are 65 to 75 and those who are 75 and above in a very unfair way, but have only provided them with a very small amount that won't actually do anything to help them cover those additional costs. Could he talk about how that's impacting his residents as well and the unfairness of that divide in our seniors?
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, I thank the member for a very good question. I think what she's seeing is the consequence of this government's policies. The Bank of Canada has purchased $300 billion worth of government debt. The government's deficit is $356 billion. In other words, about 85% of all the borrowing the government has done in the last year has simply been generated by the Bank of Canada. That has increased the money supply by 20% and drived up the costs of food, fuel, and housing for the seniors that live in her riding. Now, while this has been very good news for the very wealthy who've watched their financial and real estate assets explode in value because of all of this printing, it has been very bad news for the poor and the working class. Thank you.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat. L'honorable secrétaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a real pleasure to speak to Budget 2021 that was presented in this House by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. I'll be splitting my time with my friend from King Hans. Budget 2021 addresses two basic challenges, and that are going to benefit to my riding, to the residents in my riding, to the middle class, and it will also benefit the sector of science and innovation. Now, all of this means that we'll be able to purchase vaccines and supporting the provincial health systems with critical medical
Thanks
support.
for waiting, gang.
The second challenge is in the longer term. We're talking about emerging from the COVID-19 recession. Now, that means healing the economic scars caused by the pandemic and to make sure that we can recover as quickly as possible so that the businesses affected can come roaring back and prosper. That also means providing support where COVID-19 has hit the hardest. That means women and young people, and to low-income workers, as well as small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in sectors such as hospitality and tourism.
Our federal support measures, which represent 8 out of every $10 spent by all governments combined on COVID, have protected jobs and helped limit the number of permanent business closings. We will continue to honor this covenant with Canadians until COVID-19 is fully behind us, with new measures to support Canadian businesses, workers, and families. For example, through Budget 2021, we will extend both the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy. And they'll be extended until September 25th, 2021, with the possibility of a further extension to November, depending on the economic and public health situation. We're also introducing the Canada Recovery Hiring Program. This $595 million investment will help businesses pivot to recovery with incentives to hire back, grow hours, or increase wages. We announced a historic $4 billion investment into a digital adoption program to help Canadian small businesses become more competitive, go digital, take advantage of e-commerce, and become more competitive in Canada and around the world. And finally, we're committed to lowering credit card fees by engaging with stakeholders to lower the average overall cost of interchange fees for our small businesses. Madame la Présidente, il faut...
Madam Speaker, we have to revitalize tourism.
All right, as we're getting into the beginning of this speech, I want to take another second to say thank you to everyone for tuning in for this live stream. We're watching the debate on the budget right now. They haven't voted to pass this budget. Likely large portions of the budget will have to be debated further and brought into legislation, including the CRB extension and the changes to that amount. I made a video today talking about how they may need to make legislation in order to lower the amount. Who knows if it's going to get support in the House of Commons. This is one point, along with a whole bunch of others that need to be debated. It seems like a UBI, to answer your question, Toronto Yeller, it's not going to be debated today because it largely wasn't featured in the budget. However, an election is looking like it's coming in the summer, so there could still be hope for a program like this if you're someone who supports that. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. We're going to stay on here for a little while longer too. And let me know where you're from, where you're tuning in from. Let me know if you've been watching since the beginning. I'd love to see where people are from. It's so cool getting to know you here on these live streams. So again, thanks for watching and for liking the video and hanging out here on the channel with me.
We must ensure that regions like ours can thrive in this context of local, regional, and national tourism. That is why the government has proposed a new series of measures to support that sector to the tune of $1 billion over 3 years, thanks to Budget 2021. This includes $500 million for regional development agencies to help our tourism businesses that have been hard hit, to help them to improve their products and to invest in their growth. To attract visitors to our small festivals and local activities, the Department of Canadian Heritage will receive $200 million, and therefore our festivals and events will be able to transmit our cultural specificities across the world. We'll be ready.
On the issue of science, it has been a privilege to serve Canadians as the Parliamentary Secretary for Science throughout this pandemic. And I'm so pleased to point out that Budget 2021 delivers massive investments in Canadian science, health innovation, research and development, and innovation. We recognize the critical role that science and research will play, both in addressing the current health crisis and in rebuilding our economy and creating good jobs for Canadians. We're investing heavily to grow our life sciences ecosystem and create the biomanufacturing capacity necessary to ensure that we're more resilient in the face of future pandemics. This includes over $1 billion for biomedical research, clinical trials, and the necessary infrastructure at universities and research hospitals to undertake this work. This includes
Samnath says
dollar investment in the University of Saskatchewan's.
Samnath says the rich have to pay the taxes. That's one of the questions, right? Who's going to pay for all this pandemic spending? NDP want the rich to do it. Conservatives say that we should not be potentially spending as much on the long-term side of things. And the Liberals say, hey, we can push out the maturity of our debts, make our debts more long-term at these low interest rates, and if we grow the economy over time, it's going to pay for itself. Big questions here. Good thoughts, Samnath.
$400 million to build on Canada's expertise in this space. Madam Speaker, if you and the Canadians listening to these incredible investments proposed in Budget 2021 in science, health innovation, and research are dizzied by the sheer size and scale of these investments, then I wouldn't blame you. We are going to be unrelenting in our focus on science and evidence as the driver of policy decisions and strategic investments. And I was pleased to note yesterday that the nonprofit advocacy group Evidence for Democracy Canada commented that in Budget 2021, and I quote, "Science underpins targeted investments to drive equitable recovery and long-term prosperity." And that Evidence for Democracy were, and I'll quote again, "pleased to see strategic investments across the Canadian science ecosystem, including targeted research funding." But Madam Speaker, there is so much more, and I know you will appreciate our focus on protecting Canadians as we invest in innovative research and development. Budget 2021 promises strategic investments in emerging technologies to capitalize on areas of Canadian strength. $360 million over 7 years to launch a national quantum strategy working with great Canadian universities like University of Sherbrooke, UBC, University of Waterloo, and others. $444 million over 10 years to support the next phase of the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy for commercialization, talent retention, research and training, computing capacity.
That's an interesting thing that they're bringing up here. Like the support for sciences inside of the budget. That's something that I think is actually pretty interesting. They said they're going to support more funding for AI research, as well as genomics, right? The ability to alter human genomes to do medicine. Of course, there's some controversies with that. People are worried about designer babies becoming a thing where people can sort of pick and choose what they want their baby to be like, right? These are technologies that are developing as humans. We need to sort of think about the moral implications and as well how we're going to move this forward, what kind of regulations are going to be in these industries. But I definitely think that AI is the future, and I think any policies that are developed should be thinking about that now instead of thinking about that in 30 years when it becomes a far bigger issue.
Focuses on the pandemic today, but also addresses looming threats that require better science, better data, and better governance. My time is running short, Madam Speaker, so I won't dive deep into our climate innovation, climate research, climate action, and low carbon job creation investments. We're talking billions in transformative investments to get us to the net zero economy, which dovetail wonderfully with our carbon pricing mechanism that the Supreme Court has, after so many unnecessary years of conservative knuckle dragging and climate denial, confirmed as being within federal jurisdiction. And yes, we will be establishing and applying a climate lens that ensures climate considerations are integrated throughout federal government decision-making. We're talking about Arctic research and a census of the environment statistical trend monitoring effort. Madam Speaker, I won't delve into our investments in gender-based violence research and knowledge mobilization with funding for community research.
And we'll have to go to questions and comments. The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
He just got the cane, like, you know, in the talent show, the
Madam
big hook
Speaker.
when they
I
pulled
would
him
like
off
to
stage.
ask my colleague, he brought up tourism, and I want to talk to him about air travel.
See you later, Dwayne. Thanks for tuning in.
Page 74 of the budget, there is an announcement of $105 million over 5 years for something known as the Known Traveler Digital Identity pilot project. A Google search of Known Traveler Digital Identity takes us to the World Economic Forum document, which is called the Known Traveler Digital Identity Concept, which is talking about things like attestations of citizenship, educational degrees, and so on, including vaccination for viral disease. I'm wondering if my colleague could expand on just what the government is investing tax dollars for on this front.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Red Deer for his question, because I think it's important because many Canadians are wondering about travel, wondering about the future of travel, wondering about what restrictions may or may not be imposed. And I think the Prime Minister has been very clear on this issues related to travel, international travel, discussions around what documentation is going to be necessary. These are issues that are being discussed regularly at an international level, but the picture is not entirely clear yet. And it will be important, I think, for the member to watch closely for what our Minister of Transport and our Minister of Public Safety say about these issues going forward. Obviously, the budget doesn't outline all of the details, and I think he can expect that further details will follow in the weeks and months to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member.
The honourable member for Montcalm.
Présidente, mon collègue a dit dans son discours que son gouvernement...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague said in his speech that his government will be investing in areas where COVID hit very hard. But where COVID will be hitting hard for many years to come is in the fight against cancer. Many cancer specialists in Quebec have been coming to tell us that in the absence of the ability to test and act appropriately in cases of
I'm going
cancer,
to make an executive decision and sort of
Madam
skim
Speaker,
a little bit on this.
That they are in the highest brackets for risk, the highest unemployment, the highest needs for assistance, and yet it's going to take them 3 years, and it's going to be spent $19 million just to tell us they need some more supports and a more equal society, because we don't have that now.
And I have to get the Parliamentary Secretary to answer in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, wow, they're really rushing them through now.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will simply say that our government's record in defense of persons with disabilities is unblemished, so solid. We've legislated in the matter, we've invested historic amounts, and we're going to continue investing historic amounts, and consultation is an ongoing thing, not a one-off matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
À l'ordre, conformément à l'article 38 du règlement.
Pursuant to Standing Order 38. It is my duty to raise the questions to be raised at the time of adjournment tonight.
Defense, the honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill Health, the honourable member for Vancouver.
People from around the world, and
oh, this is still about the budgetary policy.
The
okay.
Boundaries of across the country.
This must be the final speech of this debate.
In her purview and in her toolkit in the days ahead. I want to talk about the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. And if you, I don't want to say it's a rural issue, but it's certainly an issue across the country. We know that our community.
Okay, so it seems like, gang, like everyone who's here in the chat hanging out, it seems like we're gonna. This is gonna be another like liberal speech here, which is okay. We want the Liberals to have a platform. Everyone gets a platform to say what they're gonna say. But in the past, these speeches have just been sort of a reiteration of what's inside of the budget, which it seems like this might be as well. And it's likely going to be the last speech from this debate. So I want to turn this stream to an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions about anything, right? I'll do my best to answer them. Remember, my specialties are in real estate and investing and personal finance. These are topics that I tend to specialize in, but also we like to cover macroeconomics and so sort of these policies and what it could lead into in the future, as well as anything that you're just curious about that was in the budget or that happened today if you're just tuning in now and you haven't been hanging out with us here for the afternoon. So let's take a minute here, and if you want to make sure that I see it, you can actually type @Russell in the chat, and it'll sort of like highlight for me so I can see it a little more clearly, and I can know that it's a question rather than a comment. Yeah, Dave B says this was a debate. Yeah, it was. It really didn't seem like this is what they refer to as a debate in the House of Commons. It didn't really seem all that heated or all that focused, right? And this is what the House of Commons usually looks like. One of the critiques that the House of Commons gets is that, it's not really the most efficient, right? We get a lot of posturing, a lot of policies being pushed by different parties, and largely setting themselves up for an election right now, which we feel like is probably coming in the summer. I think I believe, this is my best guess as of right now, that the Liberal government will be okay to trigger an election, and the NDP also will be by the end of the summer when we're farther along the vaccine rollout and when people are more comfortable going back out and opening up on a larger scale. I think that they're waiting for that before an election, but I believe that it's coming. Yeah, it feels like Submarine Texas feels like they should give more time for people to speak and question. Wasn't really that long. Yeah, it's more like a half-hour speech and then 5 minutes of questions. Half-hour speech and then 5 minutes of questions. I think in the back and forth of the questions, that's probably where we can get the most value out of this sort of stuff. Will the NDP push to keep the CRB at $500 like when CERB became CRB? Well, that's an interesting question, Gerald. The NDP are the only ones, at least in the things that I've watched through these debates, the other things that have happened in the House of Commons, these press conferences, the NDP are the only ones that have said that they're against the tapering of these pandemic benefits, right? They're the only ones who have said, hey, we're not taxing the wealthy, but we're taking money away from people who are struggling right now. And they're calling to question whether or not that's a good idea or not. Of course, many people think that it is an appropriate time to sort of wind down this pandemic spending when it comes to these benefits. But with everything that's going on in Ontario, BC struggling right now, is it the time to be talking about that? Well, that's up for debate again. I like to stay down the middle on these things so that you can think what you want to think of your own volition, not of what I'm trying to tell you. Yeah, Mr. Gunn says Parliament never answers questions. Yeah, and it's kind of tricky. You have a lot of people like walking the line, right? Sort of giving non-answers. That's pretty consistent. Maximus says, thoughts on IROC with crypto exchanges. What's going on with that? Well, I haven't seen any new news on that. For anyone who's not up to date, some regulatory bodies of financial institutions in Canada were forcing certain crypto exchanges, even if they're in the States, to join Canada's governing body of these financial institutions. Means you got to pay up a little bit to keep on operating in Canada. Raised some concerns that some of these crypto exchanges that many people use, Coinbase, Binance, some of these bigger US companies, well, are they going to just see Canada as a fly to an elephant and just swat it away and say, hey, we're not going to worry about serving Canada anymore because it's just an inconvenience. We're going to focus on greener pastures now that these regulations are coming in. We don't really know for sure, but I do think it's more likely that these brokerages will stay around because they probably have rather large legal teams that could handle all the regulations they have to adhere to join this body. So I wouldn't panic yet when it comes to trying to take your money out of Binance or anything like that. People have commented that on that video, and I don't think it's the time to do that at the very least. Ninja is great says, I saw Greg and Pierre make great explanations about inflation on the cost of living. What is hyperinflation? What would that be like? Okay, so I'll do my best to explain this as I understand it. I'm not an absolute expert on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, people in the chat or anyone else watching this after the live stream. But hyperinflation, as I understand it, is inflation sort of self-perpetuating, right? Once people start believing that there's going to be more inflation in the future and that their dollars that they have today won't buy them as much in the future, well, what is that going to incentivize them to do? Go out and buy as much as they possibly can, right? Which would create more inflation because when more people go out to buy things, then we have increased prices because supply and demand. If you have an increased supply or an increased demand and not an increased supply, then you're going to see prices raise. So this is what hyperinflation is, in my understanding, that it's sort of self-perpetuating inflation because people believe there's going to be inflation, so there's more inflation, and it can kind of be like a snowball effect. That's what I think people are most worried about. But we're not even sure that there's going to be long-term inflation, right? Depending on what metrics you use to measure these things. It's interesting to think about, though, for sure. Submarine Attack says, I imagine if they did block crypto companies that don't want to comply, it would turn into a great VPN sponsorship. That's a good point. The one thing behind that, though, for the VPNs is I think that it still wouldn't get you by the crypto regulations if you weren't allowed to be on a platform for that country, because most places have a know your customer sort of policy where they actually have to take like some residence info and like more extreme info that a VPN wouldn't be able to block for you, right? You'd have to sign up for the crypto exchange with not like more detailed information like where you live and things like this. I'm sure there'd be workarounds, but that's funny, a VPN sponsorship. No Canadian left behind liberal model. Yeah, many didn't qualify for CRB and were indeed left behind. Yeah, there's certainly groups that have fell through the cracks, and I think that's one of the toughest thing about this pandemic is that there have certainly been people who have suffered tremendously throughout this. Like or hate the NDP and what they say, Jagmeet Singh, in his speech that we covered last week, had an interesting line that I've been thinking about lately. And it's like, yeah, the people have been saying we're all in this together, we're all in the same storm. But the response was, but we're in vastly different boats. Right? We're in vastly different boats. We're in the same storm, but we're in different boats. Some people who have been able to invest and put away some money and invest in things like real estate and stocks and cryptocurrency as well has done relatively well throughout the past year. Well, throughout the past year, it's done incredibly well, but still quite volatile. But people who have learned about investing and done these things, well, they've done well. They're in a different boat than people who have been largely falling through the cracks. And the only thing I can say is that we don't know what the government's going to do in the future. But I think everyone should be putting some time towards learning more about personal finance and trying to take those next steps to invest if they haven't started doing so. Because personally, for me, that's what's helped me to stay at least a little bit more stable throughout this pandemic. And as much as I don't like that this wealth gap is exaggerating, I think it's almost inevitable now. So I'm just trying to be on the side of it that will allow me to provide stability for my family and my loved ones and my friends in the future. So that's the way I think about it. Play the game, but with by the rules that are currently in existence. Good question. Hyperinflation is the devalue of a country's currency. All goods skyrocket. Bread and milk become $100 and wheelbarrows of money is worth. Yeah, you think of Zimbabwe, mightiest helmuts. Yeah, that's an example of hyperinflation, right? It gets out of hand, just keeps on increasing. The pace increases, and it's a huge monetary issue. Yeah, so that's what hyperinflation is, but whether or not it's going to actually happen right now is up for debate. Alex K says, thoughts on bond rates. Speculation says rates will go up. Powell suggests transitory. You agree? Well, I mean, long term, I think bond rates are going to go up, right? But we're talking about U.S. government bonds here because they have a larger impact on the market than Canadian government bonds do. Jerome Powell, who Alex is talking about, is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but essentially Tiff Macklem is the head of the Bank of Canada. Jerome Powell is the same for the states. Arguably a large, way more influential, impactful role, Jerome Powell over Tiff Macklem, because it's like one of the largest economies in the world, the states, right? But my thoughts on bond rates, I like Jerome Powell said, we are going to see short-term inflation. When we look at it on a year-to-year rate, right? When we look at the year-over-year rate for inflation in March and April, it's going to be a lot higher because of how low inflation was in those first couple months of the pandemic. But he doesn't believe that inflation is going to be long-term. He says, hey, watch out, we're going to see high inflation numbers, but it's going to come back down to our average and stay closer to the 2%, under 2% rate that they're targeting, right? So largely, the central banks will slow down their quantitative easing programs as they see inflation right? But Jerome Powell doesn't believe that he's going to see that. We don't know if he's going to slow it down. And here in Canada, when it comes to the money printing that the Bank of Canada is doing, well, we're going to get some information tomorrow morning. They're having a live stream. I'm going to be live streaming their live stream and providing a little bit of commentary on that. But the Bank of Canada is going to come out and say, hey, here's what our targets are for our interest rates here in Canada, and that affects a whole bunch of things: housing, potential inflation, these concerns, investing. It has effects on all of that. So we're going to be live streaming that tomorrow. But Tiff Macklem, I think, he's previously said, we're not going to significantly raise interest rates until like 2023. Now, everyone can change their minds from time to time, so that's why it's interesting to still watch. But great question, Alex. Jeff Cross says they're betting on non-educated voters in general works for the Dems in the U.S. I mean, like, this is a common criticism of the Liberal government, is that they're just buying votes with these policies. Now, Liberal supporters and the Liberals themselves, I don't believe they believe that they're doing this. Christopher Freeland's come out and said that the economic impact of spending less now would be far worse than spending more now, like taking away some of these supports. That's how they view it. They think that we have less of an economic impact by spending more now. Whether or not you believe that or not, it's up to you. But interesting thought. Yeah, that's definitely a common criticism. Are they just making election promises with this budget? Is it real? Are they actually going to implement the things that they said they are? These are all questions we have to ask and look out for. Not one YouTube talks about the fight of low income. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough out there for people who have a low income, especially because you don't have as much money left over to save and invest. It's definitely tricky out there. I mean, I wish I could have better advice to help you out with that. I mean, easier said than done, but any attempt to try to increase your income can help with that. And I mean, like, when it comes to personal finance, I talk about 3 levers. I mentioned it in the course, link in the description, 50% off with coupon code LAUNCH. But I talk about it, the 3 different levers for personal finance, right? You've got your spending, you've got your earning and your investing. And I believe that you can get out of any sort of financial problem by sort of manipulating these levers into the right position. Ideally, spending as little as possible through doing things like house hacking, reducing your living expenses. That's what I do. I essentially live for free in my house because of my house hacking, the Airbnb in the basement, and the creative strategies I use there. So spending less, earning more, trying to do things that will pay you for value rather than the button and chair time that you have, right? The amount of time you spend at work, trading your money for an hourly rate. It's always ideal to trade for value. That way, the more value you can provide, the more income you can get. That's one of the ways that I talk about increasing your earnings. And the third one is maximizing, once you take care of the first 2, maximizing it and putting all of that into investments as much as you possibly can with any leftovers, so that you can slowly start to build up this investment portfolio, so that you can slowly start to, again, get out of this lower income area and be able to live more off of your investments long term. That's the goal for everyone, right? And be able to retire through that. But it's certainly tricky out there for people with low income. And my heart goes out to the people who have been struggling most in this pandemic, because they've largely been the ones that have fallen through the cracks, and something needs to be done about it. That's for sure. There's a little bit of a rant for you. Maximus says, thanks for the videos. We need more Graham Steffens and Meet Kevins for Canadians. Helpful Canadian information. Thank you for bringing me up in the same breath as those two guys. Definitely people I look up to in the YouTube space, especially Meet Kevin. He's done a lot of good for a lot of people, and I'm trying to kind of model my channel off of what he's doing in the States, because I think it's incredible the level of news coverage he brings, investing information. It's things that I'm passionate about. So I said, hey, it's obviously something that people are finding valuable in the States. Why not do it here in Canada? And I think people are finding this channel at least a little bit valuable. And if I can help people out with that while building up this YouTube channel, then I'm really happy about that. Sports entertainment, can I apply for a CRB if I'm self-employed? Yes, you could. You have to meet all the other eligibility requirements. I have videos on the channel all about that. But yeah, being self-employed doesn't mean that you can't get the CRB. It's largely decided by your income of the previous year, making over a certain threshold in order to be able to, as well as showing that you actually have a decrease in income this year. Yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, you got some insider information, KD letter J. I just watched the Senate meeting for Bill C-14, and they said they're standing in motion. What does that mean? Oh, the standing motion? I think that's just referring to what's currently being debated. Likely the Senate today is talking about Bill C-14. Remember, this is the bill that was recently passed last week in the House of Commons that would bring a pause to student loan interest on federal portions of student loans, as well as an increase in Canada's credit limit for the government to be able to borrow money from the current 1.2. Wait, no, yeah, is it 1.2 up to $1.8 billion? To the new limit. I believe that's what it was, an increase of $600 billion in the ability for the government of Canada to spend, as well as the Canada Child Benefit, $1,200 extra on top of the Canada Child Benefit over the course of a year for $300 payments. That's being debated in the Senate right now. I'm not sure where it's gonna end up, but it's likely that the Senate's gonna pass it because they don't often send things back for amendment. Yeah, Candace. Oh my goodness. I'm going to need more live streams to catch Meet Kevin. No kidding. That guy is a monster. What an inspiration. He puts out like 5 videos a day. Today, I think I'm probably going to do 3 though. I'm coming for him. I actually have one of his mugs. I bought merch from him too because I just love his channel so much. Alex K says, I agree with Powell. Inflation transitory year over year since last year was very deflationary. Yeah, until economy reopens and restabilization sets in. We're not actually in a booming economy. Businesses will compete on price to push their goods. The same will happen in housing market. Interesting thought, right? This is why some people think there's not going to be inflation because we're going to have increased competition, right? As businesses try to get back up, hiring more. That's more of a positive outlook for inflation for sure. And also the thing that people don't talk about when they talk about inflation in the future is the fact that as we increase tech and our ability to produce tech on the cheap, well, that's a largely deflationary pressure that we're fighting against in this modern economy, right? Think about if you wanted to buy a 50-inch TV 20 years ago, how much you'd have to spend. Those went for $4,000. Now to buy a 50-inch TV, you can go to Walmart and pick one up for under $500. Right? This is an example of the deflationary pressure that tech has. So there are some concerns that it may be deflation is the larger concern long term. But there's so many different things that are a part of this debate. It's interesting to talk about. Yeah, Mohd Rizwan, thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you for tuning in. You guys are awesome. I like these live streams, especially when there's like a couple hundred of us in here. We get to chat, I get to know, and like I recognize names. Like, don't think that when you comment I don't notice. Even if I don't reply every time, I recognize names from stream to stream. So I get to know people in these live streams, right? Which is so cool. I love that everyone watches my videos and is getting some value out of those too. But it's so cool to hang out here on the live stream and chat with you and get to know who you actually are. Right, where you're from. Chauvin was found guilty. Okay, wow, that's pretty big. I think there'll probably be less riots tonight because of that. I am self-employed, yet no money from this. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton for self-employed people in here. There is some for businesses, though. So if you have a business, you're self-employed, and you have a formal business, there could be some write-offs for you to get new tech into your company. I don't know what that's going to look like. Going to have to go deeper into the budget. Liberals lowered the CRB so the NDP could argue to raise it back up in exchange for the vote, and also the NDP didn't get all of that they wanted. This way they can keep fighting for the people. Oh, interesting. A little bit assuming there's some backroom deals going on between the Liberals and the NDP, so the NDP can look good while they continue to support the Liberals. Hey, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I don't know if it actually happened or not, but logically that could be a good look for both parties, right? Mightiest Helmets, thank you so much for the kind words. The channel's a true gem. Glad I found it. I appreciate you for saying that. I love working on all of this. Yeah, you're doing amazing. Oh, thank you, Ghislaine. Yeah, thank you guys for the kind words. You guys are so nice. Oh my gosh, you guys. Love seeing you, Deneen from Alberta. That's so cool. We got people from the west, people from the east. I haven't, someone's got to at me in the chat if they're from a territory, because I've said here like we want to get representation from everywhere, but I haven't seen anyone in the chat yet who lives in one of the northern territories of Canada, which would be kind of cool. that's a perspective I don't often get from people. So yeah, sports entertainment's from Montreal. What do you think of the Habs? Okay, so if you guys are the true OGs if you're still on this stream right now, even though the debate's not going on while we're just chatting. I'm gonna move chat for a second. Take a look. Oh, that's me. I'm gone. Goodbye. Okay, I'm gonna take away chat and take a look at this Rubik's Cube. Now, I'm gonna let you in on the secret. You might notice that it always changes. I'm a huge Leafs fan, right? So I typically will change that based on whether the Leafs win, the Leafs lose, who they're playing that night, whether or not the other team beat them. Like if the Habs beat the Leafs, like the next day, usually my Rubik's Cube is all red. But you guys are gonna know that little Easter egg now because you guys are the dedicated people here on this stream. Leanne's from Thunder Bay, so cool. Saskatchewan, practically a Northern Territory. Yeah, I mean, in relation to Toronto. Yeah. I have some family friends who live up in Thunder Bay or have family members that live up in Thunder Bay. It's quite a long drive. You know, I've never been west of Ontario. I hate to say it in Canada. I would love to go out there. Well, I want to drive out to the mountains and ski or snowboard for a week. That sounds great to me. But I need to see. I've seen the East Coast. I've seen a lot of Ontario. Maybe not most. I haven't been in much of Northern Ontario. But yeah, I've got to check out the West Coast of Canada. We have such a crazy, awesome country. Look at this map. Like what a huge country, and so many differences across the entirety of the country in terms of what it's like there in terms of nature and the different cultures that are all across it. I criticize Canada, but I love Canada. Rubik's Easter egg, yeah. Yeah, Candace, sorry to say, I know you're a Habs fan. I haven't seen a lot of red lately. No, you haven't. Gerald says, Russell, don't bring hockey into this. Oh, man. I'll put back up chat. Yeah, this is the concern. If I come out too heavily in my Leafs fandom, can I really be an impartial reporter of the news anymore? Oh man, the Leafs are like the big bat. They're like the Death Star of the NHL. Like everyone loves to hate them, but they're the most powerful. Maybe not this year. I don't know. They've lost a few games. Tonight at 9 they play the Canucks, so I'll be staying up a little bit late. Yeah, Audrey, that's a Rubik's Cube. Sens fans here? Oh, my heart goes out to Sens fans. My heart goes out to Sens fans. It's been a tough year, but we're enjoying Jason Spezza. So there's that. Milad from Calgary, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, be careful, you might lose viewers. Yeah, well, I mean, they lost to the Canucks 2 nights ago, Candace. So, and that was their first game back after like a month after being ravaged by COVID, right? So, who knows? Well, I think now on this Leafs talk, we're ending on something that I love, on a positive note here. Well, hopefully we'll see if they win tonight. But I think this is a great chance to end the stream. I want to take another second to say thank you to everyone for tuning into the stream, for supporting me. The super chats people have sent, so nice. The people clicking the join button, joining the channel, totally unnecessary, but definitely appreciated. Thank you for doing that, those of you who have been able to. Again, no pressure to ever do anything like that. I will do a quick plug here. Just yesterday released a course that I'm really excited about. It's going to be growing over months and even years with all information about Canadian personal finance, investing, all this good stuff, the stuff you should have been taught in high school. And it's going to be growing right now. It's in its pre-sale, so there's a whole bunch of course content in there, but because it's going to grow, it's a rather cheap price right now compared to what I plan for it to be in the future. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Link in the description. 50% off with the code LAUNCH, LAUNCH, all capital letters. If you're interested in that, that would be awesome. And I'll see you in there if you are. But even if you're not interested in that, thank you guys so much for tuning in and supporting the channel in any way that you do, just by watching, just by liking. I appreciate it. And I think we're building something special here with a Canadian focused channel. So I want to say thank you guys for that. And I think we're all part of something here. And with all that said, I'll give you my typical YouTube outro. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video, live stream in this case, has helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. Have a great Tuesday, everyone. Go Leafs, go. No one tell anyone that I said that. Go Leafs, go.